on a large scale, let's put it that way. So those are really the two main ways to solve redistricting. We have had some success with the preschool program and allowing students to stay. That actually has been a net positive in terms of improving the racial balance. It just hasn't helped enough to get us out of the soup. And so I think the state's going to be looking for something a little more aggressive. That's how it would play out.
But again, what is the recourse if we don't come up with something?
Well, at the present moment, basically what they're notifying us is that we're out of compliance with a state statute, which is not a good place to be. So they're requesting that we come up with a plan. To my knowledge, at this point, no district has tried the approach of, we're not going to do anything, come and get us. I could not, in good conscience, advocate for that. I think that, conceivably down the road, what could they do? I don't know what the consequences could be down the road. I couldn't speculate on that. I'm not sure what enforcement powers the state would have around this. But at this point, we are under an obligation to make a good faith effort to comply with the statute. Whether we agree or disagree with the statute is irrelevant. It is what it is. And I think that's, I don't know ultimately down the road if we just do nothing and we're like in contempt of court sort of thing, that would be something that I want to follow through on. I don't want to even ask that question. I don't know the answer.
Is that it, Mrs. Lou McCormick? Other board members that want to ask Mr. Convertito a question? If anybody else before Mrs. Maxon Connelly.
First, just to Dr. Title, I believe a couple previous board members a few generations back actually did articulate a informal, let them come and get us. I'm not suggesting that, but it has actually been said to a microphone. I would like to come back to Mr. Convertito because re-clarify in terms of our topic for tonight. So these guiding principles are meant to serve for two different points of focus. There's a racial imbalance consultant who has been hired to come up with a number of options, I assume with certain recommendations, and perhaps we think this is the best option and on down the line, and that should redistricting be among those things that they suggest to us, they must be guided by the guiding principles that this board approves.
That's correct.
So that's one, but there's the entirely separate aspect, which is that this board itself has put forward the notion that perhaps we need to redistrict, and that is for financial reasons, that in terms of looking at any possible renovations, at looking at any possible empty seats, that these are guiding principles that would have to guide the committee on which you are serving with two other members, so that these guiding principles are serving two completely different, well, not completely different, but they're serving two separate purposes, so that as people come up to comment, the guiding principles are understood to be guiding both efforts. Is that correct?
That's correct. Any redistricting that gets done, whether it's for capacity issues or racial imbalance, will have to follow these guidelines. And right now, those are two things in front of the board.
So this, once again, so the consultant is not going to be helping us to address space issues. They simply have to be aware of space issues because, for example, right now we're looking at approximately 90% population, that they shouldn't be coming up with a recommendation that would exceed that. They're not helping us to address what we consider to be a financial issue.
Partially true. If this board decides to go through with a redistricting, it is my hope and belief that we would not replicate expenses and use the same consultant because he will have all the data and the material to do that.
Okay. And then my last question, was the 90% discussed as in abolishing it so that this isn't even a guiding principle, changing the number, higher, lower?
It was discussed in the terms of...
And this is elementary school only, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Should the consultant determine what the overhead capacity or the headroom capacity should be. And the consensus of the board was that was a programming issue that was the purview of the board to determine what they wanted as far as loading, and what I would call loading capacity, okay? That's been the standard. We did, however, through Dr. Title, asked the consultant that question offline, and his response was his typical guidelines in the dozen or so redistricting that he's done is between 85 and 90%. So I don't think we're off. If anything, we're on the high side.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Llewellyn.
One follow-up question. In looking at the minutes from several years back when the redistricting was done at the middle school level, some of the comments I saw related to they inferred a requirement by the state because of capacity issues or fill issues at Woods. Can someone who's been around for a while kind of fill me in on that? And if that's the case, should that be added here as a guiding principle that we not forego any state reimbursement because of vacancies?
I think the discussion that you're talking about is our state reimbursement, and again, either Dr. Title or Mr. Cullen can correct me on it, ours typically runs around 23% with our loading capacity of 90%. The state looks at our 8 or 10-year projection and says, do your projections say that you will hit that 90% capacity? The state standards for square footage are less than what our standards are. So we typically don't get that full percentage, and I think it tops out at like 26 and change or 27, I'm not sure. Dr. Teller can weigh in on that. And we have always foregone some of that. And there are also some items that are not reimbursable as far as core upgrades go that you just don't get reimbursement. We've run around 22 to 23% on our building projects consistently for state reimbursement.
Yeah, I came in on the very end of this, but that was a whole different purpose. When you file with the state for a construction project, you get reimbursed based on your projected enrollment at that school. So when the Fairfield Woods addition was put on, we would file with the state, this is what we expect the enrollment to be over the next 8 years at that school. And they base the reimbursement on being in the ballpark of that figure. I'm just speculating that there had to be some projection that we were going to actually put kids in those seats, and that certainly when the redid the feeder patterns for the middle school, one of the considerations for that was to make sure that those seats at Woods were filled somewhat in line with what we had told the state we were going to put there, so that they wouldn't come back and say, you know, you oversold this on us, we're not going to give you the state reimbursement or as much state reimbursement. That's my guess. I don't know, Tom, does that sound right to you? Tom's been around longer than I have, a lot longer, yes. So that's really a different kind of thing in the sense that there you're talking about building out and adding a lot of square footage, and then projecting X number of seats being in there and getting state reimbursement based on it. So that's probably why that was a factor at that time, because it was a big addition.
So if we look at Riverfield, where we've got 20% excess capacity come January or whenever construction is complete, are we at any risk at all of losing any state reimbursement?
No, because when you file your state reimbursement, you say, here's the latest and best information we have over the next 10 years. And they say, we take the highest number in the next 8 years, and that determines whether or not your reimbursement is excessive, or whether they're going to reduce it, as Mr. Convertito said. And so if those numbers don't materialize through no fault of your own, they won't come back in 7 years and say, wait a minute, you said there were going to be 475 kids here in the year 2022, and they're not here, so give us our money back. That will not happen. That's different from the board, I think, potentially making an intentional decision of, say, building out Fairfield Woods, and then, only adding 50 kids to it. That's a whole different animal. So there's no risk to the Riverfield reimbursement. they understand their projections, and that sometimes you don't hit the projections. That's already been set. These new projections for Riverfield will have no impact on that. It's the projections at the time you file the EDO 49, which was 2 years ago.
Okay.
You know, so we're safe on
And,
that.
and when you say that's done, when do we expect that reimbursement to come in?
Well, that state reimbursement on building projects happens on a rolling basis. You file periodically to get reimbursed from the state. The final, and they withhold about 5% of your reimbursement pending the audit by the state. So when the job is essentially done, then you may remember that this board occasionally has to vote to accept the project as complete. And once the board does that, that triggers another filing that we do, and that will clean out 95% of the reimbursement shortly thereafter. Then the final 5% could be 3 or 4 or 5 years down the road because the state's so backlogged with the audits. They're just getting around to auditing Tomlinson. Tomlinson was finished before I started.
Right.
Okay, they're a little short-handed, in case you haven't noticed at the state. So the community gets reimbursed on sort of this rolling basis. Expenses are incurred, then it's submitted to the state, and then the town gets reimbursement. So it's not like you have to wait till the very end to get it all back. But you do have to expend it first, file for it, and then they send it back.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Anything else? If there's nobody, one question that I'd like to address on the, these guidelines are not a duplicate of the ones that are in our facilities planning principles. Several of them, 4 of them in particular, come in shortened version from that document. But there are 4 others that are not mentioned on this page that are still, I am assuming, Mr. Convertito, a planning guideline that this board will use. For instance, it says, will not expand the school without also expanding the core facilities to match that enrollment. It says that high school is, we'll aim at 85% capacity versus 90% capacity. So there are some other, and we'll make sure that we have correct spaces for certain curriculum. So I presume that this does not replace the pages in the long-range facilities plan, but is specifically used for the redistricting conversation and guidelines for the consultant. Am I drawing the correct conclusion?
Well, I won't be here come November, so you can draw whatever conclusion you want. Our intention was the facilities planning guide is the facilities planning guide and use for facilities planning, and those guidelines still stay in place. This does not supplement those or supplant those in any way whatsoever. This is strictly used for the moving of students from one school to another. We could have gotten very much into, you know, don't move students unless a facility's been upgraded and so forth. I would hope that the redistricting committee would sort of have that as a common sense basis to start from.
Thank you. Mrs. Gerber, and then Mr. Patton.
Yeah, through the chair to Dr. Title, I just had a couple of questions. Obviously, redistricting is always a sensitive topic, and sometimes rumors start flying around regarding reasons for why the redistricting should take place, why it shouldn't take place. And I thought it might be helpful just to at least kind of get a couple of these rumors out there just to see if there is, in fact, any fact to them. And if not, then maybe we could just kind of push them off to the side and move forward. So one thing that I've heard that I can understand where it came from because it was discussed at the board a couple of years ago is the concern that I guess the thought is that Riverfield, having just been renovated and expanded, will be closed as an elementary school, and I don't know exactly where all the 400 students will be going, but then it will be reopened as a therapeutic day program. And I didn't make this up, somebody else did, or not made it up, it said it. So it's just the kind of thing, I know we discussed it at the board table during budget season in January of 2013. I went back and checked. It came up in terms of the conversation regarding the tuition and the outplacement when that was,
Right, I remember
obviously a
that.
topic.
Yep.
Right, and so there was thought, well, could we do something in-house? and I know you and Andrea at the time mentioned were perhaps to do some sort of a therapeutic day program. I know it came up again in August of 2013 with the district initiatives that it was kind of a feasibility study.
Right.
And then, to the best of my knowledge, nothing has moved forward with that at any point. So I just wanted to get a sense, is there in fact any interest in looking into that? Has that been put on the shelf?
Yeah, there's no action going on that right now. I mean, we wouldn't have built out Riverfield to convert it into a therapeutic day program. That's a good one. We were looking at, could we find a therapeutic day program would need its own facility. You couldn't put it in as part of a school, just the nature of the students. We were looking for, is there another facility we could use for that? And given that there was no one in the vicinity, didn't be a lot of interest in it, we've shelved really any action along those lines. And certainly, the notion of putting it into an existing building was never in the cards. So that's not credible.
Okay, great. And then the other rumor that I'd heard has to do with regionalization. And I guess there was concern that if we were to have Holland Hill and Mill Hill be expanded to 504 capacity schools, that we would have excess capacity. And I guess there are concerns that there are some sort of movement or some movement being made towards regionalization with other neighboring towns, and that if we have excess capacity, that would make us vulnerable to having students from other towns come to our district.
That's another good one. No, that has never been a discussion point. It's never been discussed by myself. It's never been discussed with any superintendents. It's not in the cards. The 504s were for a whole different reason. I will say that there is a push out there from the legislature to regionalize services where you can as a way to be more efficient or save money, and most of our regionalization is done through CES. That's our Regional Education Service Center, but that's really about sort of getting together with other districts to try to do cooperative purchasing or combine on professional development. So if one district is bringing, say, a professional developer in that both districts can share, the common calendar that we've had so much fun with, that was an effort at regionalization. But there's no movement out there, certainly not to force districts to take kids in. And if we were going to ever go down that path, obviously it would be a huge policy, big change thing. But that's not in the cards anywhere. We are not looking to, quote unquote, fill empty seats by taking kids in from Stratfield or Stratford or Trumbull or anywhere. That's just not what we're trying to do. That's certainly not the purpose of the renovations and the addition. So there's just no truth to that whatsoever.
Okay, thank you.
Is it Mr. Patton? And then Mr. Fatterbean.
I just wanted to address one of Mr. Llewellyn's previous questions that I don't think was entirely answered, and then something Ms. Maxon-Kennelly said. To Mr. Llewellyn's question on are the consultants, or what was the purpose of the consultants in terms of the racial imbalance versus the redistricting committee's charge. It's not entirely true, unless Dr. Tull can correct me if I'm wrong, that when we talk to the consultants, they are fully aware of the charge of the redistricting committee, and that they're not just going to provide if they do a redistricting plan for racial imbalance, they're going to, certainly look at the entire, pie. They're not going to go and say, well, racial imbalance is only at these 3 schools, so we're going to look at these 3 schools. They're looking at the entire town, all 11 elementary schools. So they're definitely fully aware, and, according to Dr. Tyler, are not going to charge us anymore to look at, when we give them this criteria, a regular redistricting plan as well. To Ms. Maxon-Kennelly's questions about, I believe your questions about, did we just adjust the former planning principles. Was that, no. Whose was the?
I think Mr.
Well,
Llewellyn was.
It was also Mr. Llewellyn's
asked
question?
one.
Okay, well, there you go. 2 for 2. We did also look at not just the planning principles from the June 2010 from the long-range plan, but there was also things like, I guess, former board member Tim Carey created, there was a long-range planning committee that he was chair of, and there was another set of criteria and guiding principles when it came to the middle school feeder pattern that we also looked at and took into consideration, which was another kind of 9 criteria, and we did use some of them, things like avoiding changing the high school feeder pattern, creating the least amount of disruption. Those were things that weren't necessarily specifically into the other facilities principles. So there was probably, my guess is close to 16 to 20 various guidelines, and they did morph pretty closely to the original planning principles that were in the June 2010 guidelines.
Mr. Fattabine. And Mr. Llewellyn, do you want to make a comment after Mr. Fattabine?
Follow up with
Mr. Fattabine, do you mind if he follows up?
No, I do not mind.
Mr. Llewellyn.
So I guess along what Mrs. Gerber was talking about, dispelling rumors, one of the rumors that was floating around is that the charge was to change the feeder schools. Is that something you folks looked at?
Charge didn't say anything about changing feeder schools.
Okay, so that dispels that rumor. But Mr. Patton just mentioned looking at the
Well,
prior.
it didn't.
I get it, and that, so
The
that
charge
dispels the
doesn't
rumor.
mention it one way or the other. It was left to the redistricting committee, and one of our criteria was we weren't going to change feeder patterns.
Exactly. Okay, so we can dispel
So,
that
I
one.
mean,
Thank you.
Mr. Fattabine.
I guess to the chair, Dr. Title. Do you know if there's any requirement for the district to report the number of unoccupied seats to the state?
There's no requirement.
There's no requirement. So the district doesn't report the number of capacity of schools that are unfulfilled to the state.
We don't have to report unoccupied seats to the state.
Did we report any capacity that the district has to the state?
I don't believe there's anything we do, Tom. Is there anything we send in? No, I don't think so.
Okay.
There's a facilities survey they do, but they don't ask about capacity and, yeah. Yeah, I'll check. I don't believe so. It's in the eye of the beholder, capacity.
So there's no statutory requirement to provide the
Fill all
state
the
with their
seats.
capacity?
Yeah, and even if you did, there's no requirement that you fill your seats, as far as the state's concerned.
No.
Yeah.
But my question was the requirement to report to the state
Unused
of
capacity?
unused capacity to the state.
I don't believe so.
No, there's no separate notification to the state for unoccupied
Right.
seats.
Okay.
Thanks, Tom.
Anything else, or this is a first read. These redistricting guiding principles will come back to the newly constituted board at the meeting in November, and it's not infrequent that with new board members, they might ask for more time, so it could end up going over to the December meeting. But this is considered a first read, and so before we go to the public, anybody else that has a last-minute comment they wish to make? Mrs. Lou McCormick.
I wanted to just clarify Mr. Patton's comment regarding the consultant. I just want to be clear, they were retained to look at redistricting to the extent it resolved the racial imbalance issue. They were very clear that they were not going to be doing a full redistricting study, and that if in fact we wanted them to do that, we would have to further retain them to do that study. That's what they clarified to me, I think, when we had our first meeting with them. So I just want to make that clear, because I don't think that was clear before. And then secondly, there was one more rumor that I wanted to dispel, because that came up at our last redistricting meeting, which was that
Rumor
the-
season.
I know, that the voting redistricting that occurred, if that had anything to do, well, since we haven't done a redistricting, but people seem to think or had the impression that they had been redistricted already according to the voting
Did come up.
redistricting. But maybe you can just confirm that in fact they are unrelated.
Right, I was at the subcommittee where somebody in the public made that comment, that They've already been redistricting. So the voting redistricting is a completely separate thing from what we're talking about here. It has nothing to do with this whatsoever. And we couldn't redistrict you because we vote in a church, so that would be really hard to redistrict somebody into.
So there's been no redistricting that's occurred, right? Because I think some people thought they
No.
had been redistricted already.
Yeah, right. For
Okay.
voting purposes, they have, not for school purposes.
Okay, if there are no further comments, make a couple of comments and then invite people to come up to the microphone. At our town hall-style meetings, we have wanted to have an opportunity to dialogue with members of the public, from members of the public directly to the board, and the staff have not normally attended those meetings. You might notice that Mr. Cullen is the only representative of the central office staff in addition to the superintendent. I have asked the superintendent to retire to the audience, if you will, and stay and listen for a while. He goes to more than a few out-of-school hour evening meetings and weekend stuff, so at some point he may rejoin his family. Let me remind you of a couple of other points. I see that there are a couple of elected public officials here and at least one past school board member who have some expertise related to the original planning principles that Mr. Patton commented on or that are in the long-range facilities plan, and certainly if they wanted to make a comment, I would try and get them up so that they're not last in line. And I think I see a member of the representative town meeting here as well, so if you wish to speak, make sure that you let me know that so that I can get you up here. And I will not be being part of the response. I'll moderate, if you will, to make sure that you stay on time and that everybody gets a chance to speak at the board table in response to whatever you're commenting. I'll wait until the very last comment, and if I have anything that I think has not been said already, I'll make any comments I wish to make at the end of the meeting. We have had another habit, which is we ask board members in kind of a rotating fashion to go first in response to a comment from the public, and I'll maintain that as well. And then once that person goes first or defers in going first, then whoever raises their hand and wants to speak on a particular issue, then raise your hand, and we don't have to have everybody speak, but you're welcome to speak in that regard. And we will have up to 3 minutes per speaker, and I'll give you a 1-minute warning when you are ready. So what, oh, you'll time?
Yeah,
Oh, good.
Yeah. And also just one other thing, because last meeting we had a little trouble hearing some of the names on the recording. So there's a sign-up sheet there at the table. So when you come up to speak, if you could just write your name, and if you wish to include your address, you could do that, and then we'll collect it at the end of the evening so we can put it in for the minutes. Thank you.
So could I have a quick raise of hands so I have a sense of how long this meeting might go as to how many people wish to speak? I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I've got probably a dozen at the moment, so that means that we probably will get out of here at a reasonable time. Let me have a couple of members of the public that wish to speak, and then I'll invite the moderator, since she raised her hand, to speak, and then as I say, I'll intersperse, including the honorific position of immediate past member of this board, if Mr. Kerry wishes to speak. So please, come forward, state your name and address, and please do write your name on the sign-in sheet.
Hi there, Matt Husselman, Pansy Road. I'm just asking if at all possible, if this redistricting, at least the space portion of it can be cut off right now. I don't know how to put this simply. Nobody wants this. Nobody wants this. No one I've talked to wants this. Parents have two reactions when they hear the word redistricting. Oh no, and why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? There's no new school. There's no school being closed. There's no school being open. There's no reason for this. Everyone knows Holland Hill needs to be built out. What are we going to do? Are we going to change the redistricting patterns every every year, every week. I mean, oh, this turn, it's your turn to go here this week. I mean, there's no reason for this. We know what needs to be done. We need 90% capacity because we need slack in the system. And redistricting, what's number 8 say? Create the least amount of disruption. You know what creates the least amount of disruption? No redistricting. That creates the least amount of disruption. No one wants this. I haven't. My worry is that come November, there's going to be 7 people in Fairfield that want to redistrict, and 5 of them are going to be on this board. That's my biggest worry. No, there's just no one that wants this. There's no reason for this. It's just incredibly disruptive. It's like civil war in Fairfield. It just I am a walker to Osborne Hill, and I want it to stay that way. I don't want any risk of being, well, you know, we have to move this and this board. I mean, there's no right, we live like on a quarter mile from Osborne Hill, but there's no walkers to Tomlinson. So some consultant, I mean, I don't care if we got him at a 2-for-1 discount on Groupon. I don't care how much it costs, or if we got him for cheap. You know, but there are no walkers to Tomlinson, and I'm worried they're going to say, well, no walkers to Osborne Hill. Well, there is, you know, everyone buses and blah, blah, blah. So please, can we have a vote to kill this now? Let's stop the boulder at the top of the hill before it gets to the bottom. Or, well, we're here anyway, so, you know. I mean, I don't like to hear about, you know, well, what are neighborhoods? Because there's no reason for this. No one wants it. And can we please, could someone please offer an amendment to kill this tonight? Thank you.
So why don't I start, and then we'll go clockwise around. Mrs. Eileen Loomis.
Mr. Dwyer, I don't know if you want to remind the members of the public, since this involves give and take, if Mr. Hutzelman wants to stay at the table, just in case.
He had escaped.
No, you had escaped.
Yeah. Mrs. Lou McCormick, do you wish to go first? If not, who wishes to speak?
No, I think his position's very clear on the matter, so no, thank you.
Anybody wish to comment or respond? So let me explain one thing, although Mr. Convertito is inviting me to violate my own rule. This is a special meeting. FOI rules do not allow adding an agenda item, and especially not even an action item, to a special meeting. And so the first time that this can be on an agenda to even talk about the proposal that you have is the first meeting in November. That's just state law and parliamentary procedure and all the rest. Any other board member wish to make a comment?
I'd like to make a point of order comment.
Mr. Fattabine.
I guess a point of order in that traditionally we didn't have commentary. Board members at our meetings were not indicated, not directed or prohibited from dealing with commentary with the public when they made public comment. Is this now going to be a precedent for future board meetings that we're going to now have a dialogue with the public? Are we going to? Is that the way we're going to work it now?
I don't think that's a point of order, Mr. Fattabine, but I'll respond to it anyways.
I think it's a point of order. This is the first time I was at a board meeting where we had at a board meeting where we would respond to comments by the public.
Shall I respond?
Certainly.
Okay. We've held 2 other special meetings that have been in the town hall style of meeting, in which we have, including yourself, had dialogue back and forth. And that's what this meeting is about. Every regular meeting will follow the prescribed agenda and the bylaws, and every special meeting that has a specific purpose, whether it's considering a contract or something else, does not have public comment. But whenever we schedule a meeting in a town hall style of conversation, twice before, this is the 3rd time, I suspect that this board is willing to continue to have meetings where we can dialogue back and forth to the public, because at least during my conversations with the public, it's that lack of back and forth that they felt was a fault, if you will.
Can I respond to that?
So the answer is, to your point of order, the answer is we have done it before, we're doing it tonight, and the only way that the board could say, no, we're not going to do it, is if you challenge the ruling of the chair and we have to go through a vote process. Is that what you wish to do?
No.
Then I will move on.
Our town hall style meetings were recent vintage.
Yes, Mr.
And there may be
Fattabine
reasons to have those which I agree with. I've always been
we're
advocates.
here to listen to the public.
I know. I'm making a point of order.
And you made a
Don't want
point
me
of
to
order.
respond to you?
You made a point of order. I made a ruling on the point of order. If you wish to challenge that, then challenge it. If not, can we go back to the public?
Can I comment on your commentary?
No, because that's not a process to be used in point of order. You make the point of order, I make the ruling.
I
Wish to challenge.
asked if it was going to be a precedent now that at our meetings we're
I've
going to have
explained
that.
that. So
And the
let me
distinction with the other town hall
mean,
meetings,
May I move on, please?
you can move on as much as you want.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wish to speak in response to Mr. Hutzelman's comment?
I guess I'll be the only one somewhat brave enough to tackle this. And I guess, with hopefully not trying to sound too redundant, we've addressed these types of comments at the subcommittee meetings themselves, on and offline. The committee and the charge was formed because several members of the board wanted to explore options that did not involve full construction and expansion of schools, and since we had deficiencies space-wise, capacity-wise in some schools, could we figure out a way to maximize our efficiencies, whether that was possible or not. And several members, including myself, agreed that if the R word ever came up, in my case, I would be willing to do my due diligence and serve on said committee. With regards to your question on why can't we disband that right now, obviously Chairman Dwyer gave you the legal answer. In my opinion, at least at this point, I think we've come up with a set of criteria that we've got to give to the consultants, who are, charged with helping us with the redistricting issue and trying to solve racial imbalance, whether it's a redistricting plan or not, and they need this criteria. So we kind of need to give it to the consultants and let them at least start their work and see what they have to say, and this may come to nothing. But I agree that, certainly no redistricting is less disruptive than redistricting.
Thank you.
That's about it.
Can I move on to the next speaker? So, Mr. Fattabine, on Mr. Hutzelman's comment.
Yes. No one likes the redistrict, and I've been through other redistricting. I never liked it, and no one likes it. But the problem, it appears to be, that the elementary school population in 2010, 2011 was 4,758. The elementary enrollment as of 9/11/15, taking out pre-K, because that didn't exist in 2010, is 4,566. The current enrollment of every elementary school, but for Holland Hill and Sherman, are less than it was in 2010. So in order to renovate Holland Hill, we're going to get town funding. The town's got to be convinced that we need to renovate, and we got to renovate Holland Hill. If they,
If I could,
if
please.
Holland Hill it doesn't go through all the town bodies with funding, it's not going to be renovated. I would like to renovate Holland Hill. I want to get funding to renovate Holland Hill. But there's no guarantee that funding is going to come forth. And unless you have a plan for the town to understand and appreciate that you need to have Holland Hill renovated, and that you're acting prudently to avoid excess capacity, and therefore that's not going to happen in Holland Hill, then you're going to run into problems with funding. And that's one of my concerns. It's always been my concern that at some point, with all our construction we've had, the town's going to say, enough is enough, I don't want to pay any more. And that's a real risk. And it's an effort to avoid that problem and have a continuing interest in the town of funding renovations in elementary schools, as well as other schools, that you have to, I think, act prudently and have a plan. And that's, you got to look at the numbers and be realistic. And I think renovating every school and every elementary school to a 504 capacity, when there's an argument that you don't need it, is going to at some point render some elementary school not getting the renovation. And that's my concern. So that's my rationale.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr.
Mrs. Gerber. And then I do want to make this the last comment so we can get another speaker up here.
Yeah, well, I guess just in terms of the excess space, I think the Holland Hill community has certainly shown, and having seen the school, it needs renovation, and it does need an expansion. And if you look at the cost, I mean, I know the board asked Mr. Cullen to break out the costs of a 462 design and a 504 design, and the difference between the two was $790,000. So the 504 was 9.96 million, and the 462 was 9.1 million. So the difference, I mean, obviously $790,000 is not nothing, but if you're talking about the fact that I believe everyone on this board acknowledges the fact that Holland Hill does need renovation, it does need core upgrades, it does need to make sure that students are not getting services in inappropriate spaces. So if we're going to be quibbling about 1 or 2 classrooms, especially when we do have members of the other town bodies who have very clearly stated at the capital planning workshop that they were in favor of a 504 project for Holland Hill. So I feel, I mean, yes, they haven't voted on it, and yes, I understand that there could be different people on the town bodies come November, but the fact of the matter is we had a very clear statement that they support a 504 for Holland Hill. So my concern is that if we continue to go round and round about this, we're wasting time when we could be getting the ed specs going on Holland Hill sooner than later.
Thank you. Can I have another speaker here, and then I'll ask if Ms. Iacona wishes to come forward. And then if you don't, just kind of give me the high sign. Please state your name and address. And Matt, did you sign in? Please do. Yeah, please. State your name and address.
Yeah, my name is Greg Jackson. I live at 61 Longview Avenue. So a couple things here. I was looking at the maps, and I guess I'm a little concerned about the discussion being focused around race because obviously, right, we don't have a lot of race in this room. So I think really what we're talking about here is a socioeconomic disparity, and that cuts across racial lines. So I'd like to make that point known. And I think if we take racial imbalance for what it is, that it reflects the socioeconomic disparity in the town that we live in, then we need to start looking at what the maps tell us, which is where do the schools that would be most directly affected by the redistricting lie within the town borders. And if you look at those maps, then you start to see that it's around the Bridgeport border and that the northwest and southwest corridor of the town would be less directly impacted by redistricting. So if continuity is an economy and it has value here, then what we're looking at is kids closest to the Bridgeport border being more adversely affected by the redistricting than students who are in the southwest corridor or the northwest corridor, which would continuously stay in the same area. So I think that's an extremely important issue to consider, that maybe race is more of a fog here than the socioeconomic question. But if we want to deal with disparity, which I think there is disparity that does exist, knowing my children going to Holland Hill, then I think we can reverse that disparity by making the upgrades to the facilities that would mean that there's not an equity within our school district. So, I mean, this is fundamentally the issue that we're talking about. If we're talking about redistricting, we're talking about equity. So if there's an equity question, that equity question could be resolved by making sure that all the facilities within the district are in fact equitable, and that we don't have overcrowding, that we have equity in the services that are being provided and the means in which they're being provided. So I just wanted to put that on public record and perhaps hear some responses.
Mr. Patton, you get the first response if you wish.
The only way I would comment to that is if we had $100 million of excess cash in this town or could borrow it for free, I would put air conditioning in every single elementary school. I would build out every school to a 504, and we would hope that we would never have deficiencies for classrooms or special needs ever again. But the reality is that it's why we have this waterfall chart in the town, which we didn't have 10 plus years ago. They school building projects were kind of haphazard, and things got pushed off year after year after year. There's not board members here that were from, let's say, 10 years ago, but I remember attending meetings back that far, and you would just hear, well, we're going to save some money in the budget this year, and instead of putting the new whatever into building X, we're just going to put it off till next year because we can, and we can balance the budget that way. So that waterfall chart enables us to put these schools on a plan, but we don't have $100 million. So if it's $10 million every couple of years that we can borrow, then that's the plan. And certainly we know that Holland Hill and Mill Hill are next on the list, and we know what we want to do. We know what we have to do. We know, as Jessica said before, that we have to get the ed specs for Holland Hill done, and we have to have them done and approved as soon as possible at the beginning of next year.
That's great. I would just say that, the generation of today needn't pay for the sins of the past. So, I agree with you that money doesn't grow on trees. But that being said, it's the kinds of priorities that we're putting forth on a town level. And public education, human capital needs to be high on that list if we're going to be making other kinds of decisions to stay within a particular threshold of the, where we want to be on debt.
Okay, Mrs. Maxon Connelly, you wish to make a comment?
Yes, because for what's important for me is that we are setting these guiding principles. And specifically to your point, as far as I'm concerned, looking at number 5A, consider deficiencies of existing facilities, it is exactly why I would certainly argue that that's a vital principle to have as part of our guiding principles, because to me, under that umbrella of considering deficiencies, it is deficient if we have inequitable facilities. So to me, your point is being very specifically addressed by any redistricting that is looked at must be considering these things, and whether you want to have an argument, whether there is an argument down the road that, well, then you need to redistrict in order to address that, that's obviously going to be a separate argument. But certainly in terms of renovations, that would be addressed here. So obviously I would think then I'm agreeing with you in terms of if your argument is that this is a guiding principle that is important that the board substantiate and confirm that this is something that should guide any future discussion, I would be completely in agreement with that.
Yeah, and I think the point I was really trying to highlighting is that there's two separate issues here. I think there is a inequity problem in this town that is materializing within its schools, and we have some evidence to it. But then at the same time, even the plans that are put forth to decide what redistricting would look like seem to reinforce subtly those disparities by deciding who and will not be forced to get on a bus and go somewhere, and that problem itself mirrors the larger issue.
And which, if I may follow up on that, which is exactly why I completely agree with what the committee did. I don't know if there was any pulling and gnashing of teeth on this, but that number one, that neighborhoods be maintained, the point being build the schools where the children are. The Holland Hill children are, that's, I think, one of the only schools I think they have 2 buses. Everybody else is a walker. That truly is a sense of community there. Well, if we are saying established neighborhoods should be maintained, then based on that principle, that's where the school needs to be built, and that's where the expansion, in addition to the renovation, must take place.
Cool.
Any other? Mrs. Lou McCormick.
And I don't know if this gives you any comfort, but over the last, several weeks, even months that we've been talking about this, I think every board member has completely agreed that Holland Hill and Mill Hill need a renovation. They're up for renovation, and that everybody is fully, fully behind that. The question of whether a redistricting is going to be looked at and how the racial imbalance question is addressed is unfortunately, I think, almost beyond the board. This is a state requirement to question why Dr. Title has to retain a consultant in order to look at redistricting kind of goes beyond and goes to a state statute that the board is trying to fulfill, if you can understand that.
No, I understand that completely well. I'm well aware of how disparity functions in the U.S., not just in Connecticut or in Fairfield. I guess I just want to make sure that when if somewhere down the line redistrict is something that being revisited, that the kinds of plans that are put forth here don't simply mask, which is, to me, the key issue here, which is socioeconomic.
Exactly. No, you're exactly right. So a real solution, is ideal. But I would also, just go back to, and even when, we think we have something that's perfect, even if you look at the plan and you say, well, you live right next to the school, so you should be able to stay walking. But look, there are people being bused all the way to far away, right now. So no matter what we do, no matter what a board ever does, and it's never going to please everybody. It's very difficult to, right?
No, I would agree. I guess I would, if then, to return to my original statement, if continuity has value, then I would be curious to know where who continuity is not, that doesn't exist for. So if there is people that are going to be moving, what are the other patterns of disparity that those people are experiencing?
Exactly. So let's hope if we ever get there, we have a consultant who comes in. Yeah.
Mrs. Gerber wishes to make a comment?
Well, just to clarify one thing, I believe that most elementary schools do not have students being bused all over the place, which is one of the reasons why we're discussing the whole idea of neighborhood schools and that there are so many walkers. I think the only two schools that don't have any walkers are Dwight and Burr, and that's because of their location, because there are no sidewalks. So they can't. Even a child who lives right next door to Dwight or Burr is not a walker or not required to walk because it wouldn't be safe. But I think the idea of making sure that at the elementary schools where walkers can walk to school, that it's very important to keep that idea. And when you're talking about students being bused to different areas, I believe that's more of a middle school and high school issue, and that's simply geographics when you have two middle schools on one side of town. And a town the size of ours, it's unavoidable, unfortunately, and having sat through all of the middle school redistricting meetings, I know how hard they worked on that, but I just think it's important to make the differentiation between elementary school and middle school, because those are two very, very different animals.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. So do I see, you'll wait to hear more, okay. Please come forward, state your name and address.
Hi there, Ann Harvey, 363 Hemlock Road. Well, I'd like to thank you. I'd really like to thank you all because your insistence on leading us down this wasteful and frankly infuriating discussion of redistricting has allowed many of us to awaken the majority of folks in this town. You've even got the Republican Town Committee saying it's them, not us. The boards of finance and selectmen saying, please stop stalling. Move forward with the full renovations to Holland Hill and Mill Hill to 504 schools. And let's be clear, I believe this subcommittee was formed solely for the purpose of board members doing their due diligence before they will move forward with these renovations that all the town bodies are begging them to do. But we're being told tonight that it has something to do with the racial imbalance, and I do not think that that is correct at all. Thank you also because your false assertions made in public forums on redistricting that we have vast numbers of children attending Fairfield Public Schools illegally has allowed me to highlight your lack of knowledge about programs and state mandates that you should know about. Thank you for your lack of civility on this issue and so many others. It reminds us that so much real progress in our schools can be accomplished when we work together in a spirit of mutual respect. That our core values are tainted when we attack our teachers, our principals, and our administrators. You've given me the chance to remind parents that the same group of you who tried and failed to make a power grab last year by rewriting the Board of Ed bylaws in an attempt to strip powers from the office of the superintendent and transfer them to your hands, the same group of you are now wasting our time and our tax dollars with this redistricting exercise. Thank you most of all for allowing me to educate parents about the real danger for all of us if you are allowed to force not just redistricting, but your personal education agenda upon our public school system. And Mr. Fatabeen, fear not, I will not push you on your hidden agenda and why you really don't want to renovate.
If I would ask board members of the public not to call out a board member's name, please.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening.
Can I respond?
Ms. Carnell, do you mind if Mr. Fatabeen goes first this time? Mr. Fatabeen.
I'll
go second. Fair enough.
I always appreciate public comment, and I've always been an advocate of public comment, and that's one of the things that changed in the bylaws that I was an advocate for. And against with removal of public comment at certain issues at a period of time. I've always been an advocate of that, of public comment. So it's okay to have public comment even about me, because I can take criticism. I do not have any agenda whatsoever except for the best interest of the school district and the town. And my concern with the district, as we proceed forward, is that at some point we're going to run out of money. And you want to make sure you have enough money to help everyone in the district and not run out. So you have to pace yourself in how you do renovations. We've done that with the waterfall chart. And if I had my druthers, every school would be a great brand new school. And I've been involved in the Board of Ed during many renovations and an advocate of many of those renovations. And quite frankly, I am surprised that the town of Fairfield still has the ability to fund those renovations. But if you listen to other taxpayers and other people, that patience of funding the Board of Ed may be running out, and that's my concern. I don't want it to run out. And if you act prudently and have a plan, my hope is it doesn't run out. But at some point, you're going to hit a wall, and you're going to run out. And then you're going to have to make dramatic changes to the budget. And that's going to be painful. And we went through the process of budget cuts in the past and had a difficult time cutting things. I don't want to see that. But if we go without a plan and go constantly asking for more money, more money, more money, at some point we're going to have that problem. And I don't want to see that problem in Fairfield. And that's my concern. So that's my only agenda, and that's not hidden. I've always advocated for that. I have no hidden agenda whatsoever. And if you think I do, I'll be glad to discuss what that might be, because I want to be enlightened what my agenda is.
Okay, after the meeting, you can have a personal conversation. Ms. Carnell gets the first, if you will, after deferring, and then I'll go to people who have raised their hand.
Thank you for sharing your comments, and this one in particular I'd like to make sure that I heard correctly. I think you said the committee was a masking for the racial imbalance, if I heard you correctly. You had said something about...
What I was trying to say was that my belief is that this committee was formed because the Board of Ed, for whatever reason, does not want to move forward with the full renovations of Holland Hill as all other town bodies are asking them to, not because that this committee needs to address the racial imbalance situation. But I'm hearing so much about racial imbalance tonight, I'm not hearing enough about moving forward with those renovations.
Okay, I want to make sure I understood you correctly. I think, I myself are not a fan of redistricting for no reason of redistricting. But there is clearly an issue, and Dr. Title stated earlier, about our racial imbalance. So if we're going to make changes, it makes sense to make the changes at the same time, okay? And to add on to Mr. Fadabine, if I remember correctly, Mill Hill was originally supposed to have, Ms. Iacono shaking her head, but, no, it was in the...
For the new board, so the public knows, for the new board members, they came on board at a time when the waterfall chart had been readjusted to allow for 2 other projects to go forward, but the original and still the existing 2010 facilities plan had Holland Hill first. So
at the time we
it's
received
a question
it.
of history.
Right, at the time we received it. And I think to add on, and I happen to be a Mill Hill parent and still voted for Holland Hill. So let's get my hidden agenda on the table. There is none. To Mr. Fadabine, I agree. If you look at every school in this town, every school needs something, from lockers to air conditioning, every school. You show me a school that doesn't. They just finished a project at Ludlow High School, and it still needs work. So I think to Mr. Fadabine, trying to say, where do we spend the money? How do we spend it for every school that needs redistricting? Do we take it out of teachers and books and what students learn? I don't think anybody wants to do that. But if you can figure out, to Ms. Patton, how to raise an extra $100 million, that would be great.
Mrs. Gerber, followed by Mrs. Maxon Cannelli.
Well, just to the thought about needing to have a plan, we do have a plan. We have a long-range facilities plan, and we have the waterfall plan, which was discussed in great detail at the Board of Finance and I guess it was the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen were there, and there were also representatives from the RTM last month. So I understand the concern about having to each year go back and say we have another project, but it's not as if we are springing this on anyone. I mean, before there didn't used to be a long-term plan. Then the board and the administration worked together to create one. And since then, they've been sticking with it to the best of their abilities, except when projects run over and then things get pushed back, which is what happened here. At one point, Holland Hill would have been, I don't think done by now, but would have been on its way to being done by now. But because of Ludlow and because of Osborne Hill and because of Riverfield, everything keeps getting pushed back. But nonetheless, this plan has been in place. So it's just a little frustrating to say that, oh, we need to have a plan. We do have a plan. And it may not be the plan that everybody likes, but it is a plan that's been presented that the other town bodies last month said they thought we should move forward with Holland Hill. So that is my hope.
Mrs. Maxon Connelly.
Okay, to a few of your points. First of all, to be very blunt, I think it was a big whoops until Mr. Cullen tells me otherwise that Mill Hill ever appeared on that list as first. It was never voted on by this board. It should never have been. It was not as a result of any board discussion. Holland Hill was always supposed to be. Suddenly it did, and to the, in understanding to new members, they had no idea that that was never previously the case. So to speak about Mill Hill as being first, that was never supposed to have been. We then had a full year of exploring it to make sure that that was justifiable, and so that has now been put to rest. But to your other points, I actually enormously appreciate that you bring up the racial imbalance issue, because I think you are hearing exactly what I'm hearing, which is suddenly it's being conflated with the work of the redistricting committee. And that is exactly why I tried to very specifically address to Mr. Convertito the whole notion that, let us be clear, these guiding principles are serving two completely separate functions. That redistricting ad hoc committee was started to address space capacity issues and money. It was for money, and I'm not discounting money as a concern, but that committee was never started to address racial imbalance. And the conflating that has happened here, which is perfectly natural, that I understand that it should, because the racial imbalance consultant has met with the redistricting ad hoc committee. However, those are in fact two completely separate things. What Mr. Hutzelman addressed before when he discussed the disbanding of the redistricting committee was because he did not believe, and many of us believe, but that's an issue for November, that committee is not going to fulfill its purpose, that is not the way we want to handle space capacity issues with pocket redistricting. So I'm hearing exactly what you're hearing, and I want to repeat for you and for the sake of the public that these are two separate issues. And this board knows those are two separate issues. Secondly, to Mr. Fadabian's point, but this whole idea of pacing and, first of all, I hope people do not conflate the money that goes into these building projects with our operating budget. The town doesn't view them the same way, neither should the board be doing that in terms of conflating those money issues. And we have been told in communication through this board with the other town boards that there's a certain amount we can spend. That in terms of the bonding issues, in terms of the 10% that we can spend, that waterfall doesn't exist in a vacuum. It was done in communication with the other town bodies. The town has its own buildings that need renovation. Now, granted, our school buildings are town buildings, but there are town buildings aside from that need renovations. So this was done in full concert with all other elected officials. They are on board with this. So I actually don't think it's helpful to start throwing around numbers like 100 million, we could solve this. This is part of a very careful, organized plan. So we are stepping forward very responsibly with it. And so not that I discount Mr. Fadabian's concerns, but there's certainly nothing capricious about this at all.
Mr. Llewellyn, you had your hand up, but Mrs. Gerber wishes to follow up on. So Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Llewellyn, and then Mr. Fadabian.
Well, I pulled out the committee purpose, which the board voted on, and it's to review and, if appropriate, recommend multiple revision options to the attendance boundaries of the elementary schools to efficiently and appropriately utilize school facilities for elementary school students. So that's the purpose of the committee. There's nothing about racial imbalance in here.
Thank you. Mr. Llewellyn.
Okay. So to address the racial imbalance, if we kind of go back to the written document as opposed to what's being bantered around in the public, May 20th, Dr. Title received a letter from the state of Connecticut. On May 6th, the Connecticut State Board of Education accepted a report concerning the racial imbalance statistics for all schools in the state. It goes on, the Connecticut State Board of Education shares my concerns about the increase in racial imbalance. Therefore, I am requiring the Fairfield Board to submit an amended plan to address the racial imbalances in the school, and it goes on. The date of that is May 20th. At the June 23rd meeting, we talked about the waterfall. And if you go through the waterfall, there were a lot of statements made. One was the numbers that we were being presented didn't necessarily match those which the updated numbers reflected in terms of student population. Some of the folks at the prior meeting, Mr. Patton had, as he said a moment ago, brought up the redistricting concept. During the conversation on June 23rd, Mr. Convertito said that I would be comfortable moving ahead with these placeholders with 9.1 million and 13.3 million, with a caveat that we look at redistricting moving forward and we get a committee set up as soon as possible. So I think, and I can't confirm this, but I think 6 or 7 folks on this board mentioned redistricting at one point, because we actually have a fiduciary responsibility rather than an emotional one here. I think if you go on and you look, Mr. Dwyer, Chairman Dwyer, was the person who actually set up that ad hoc committee and appointed Mr. Patton, Mr. Convertito, and Ms. Lou McCormick to that. So I don't necessarily agree that we can strip out the racial imbalance letter, because we received that, I believe, before any of these motions were even made. So we do have some information that you may not be aware of. So they are intertwined one way or the other. We have an engagement by a consultant who is looking at the racial part first. Why? It's state mandated. So you can't strip them out.
Mr. Fattabine, followed by Mr. Convertito.
The town does have a waterfall chart that the Board of Ed's projects are included with, but that has changed in the past. And until the money's appropriated, we don't have it. And that's my concern.
Mr. Convertito. And can this be the last comment so I can move to another speaker?
Sure. My comments in the June meeting were in response to the discussion at the board in which nobody wanted to approve the waterfall plan. Okay, so I capitulated saying that I would put work into a redistricting plan if we pass the plan with the placeholders. If you look at those placeholders, okay, and this is where this whole thing becomes disingenuous, those placeholders renovate Holland Hill to a 462 and Mill Hill to a 441, okay? That's what those placeholders do. They're not 504s. They're a 504 platform in that they call for a dedicated music room, instructional rooms, special ed rooms, and so forth. As far as the core platform, they do not have 24 classrooms, okay? They are a 462 and a 441, and that's where this whole thing becomes disingenuous. You can take any snapshot of the population in this district and make an argument for or against redistricting. Look at the history, okay? People want to say, look at Riverfield. Well, Riverfield had 488 students 6 years ago, okay? Osborne Hill still has over 500 students. Okay? If you look at Sherman School, which was renovated for 462, there's 488 students there. Mill Hill had 470 some odd students as little as 5 years ago. Redistricting will not solve the problem of space utilization, okay? I made that capitulation to prove that point, okay? And if you look at the guidelines, you can't move from Holland Hill to Osborne Hill because you can't move enough students out of Osborne Hill into Riverfield, okay, to make the room, all right? And that's the only place you can redistrict if you're not going to screw up feeder patterns, okay, is from Holland Hill to Osborne Hill to Riverfield, okay? You can't move enough students out of Holland Hill, out of Osborne Hill to reduce the need for a minimum of a 462 at Holland Hill, okay? You can take a snapshot of any statistics to prove it. If you look at our 10-year rolling population, go back 10 years. Here they are. They've been in your Friday packets for 10 years, okay? Every school that we have renovated has come up to a 90% or higher capacity since their renovation, okay? I agree with you. This is a waste of time.
Please. Thank you very much for coming forward. Who wishes to speak next? Please state your name and address.
Tina Brown. Oh, my pencil's out of lead. Tina Brown, 35 Quaker Lane. And I don't think anyone's going to want to comment back because mine's more of a comment than anything else. I think the only person at the board table who's been at more board meetings than I have is Mr. Fattabine, because I've been coming since the rest of you weren't on the board, but Mr. Carey, Ms. Iacona were. And I would think that you have to be as frustrated as I am, and I appreciate all the people that are here, but as a person who comes on a regular basis, the amount of misinformation that I am hearing from the public is because they don't come to these board meetings. And if you are really that interested, I mean, I've been hearing about Holland Hill for a long time. I have not heard one board member here say at any time, no, we're not going to do that. We don't care that Holland Hill is overcrowded. I have heard every board member's concern and discussions about what to do. and I just wish the public would come more often to hear the work that you do and not have so much disinformation. So thank you to all of you.
Please, trying to make sure that every speaker gets a chance to, I realize that you're coming forward, but even though the prior speaker said probably people won't want to comment, the board still may want to. Mrs. Gerber, do you wish to make any opening comment on the prior speaker's comments? Any other board member that wishes to? Mrs. Lou McCormick.
I just do want to express our appreciation that, you know, people do come, they do listen, and they care enough to appreciate the fact that this board is composed of volunteers who do dedicate their own time just in the interest of education. And as much as a lot of misinformation on personal agendas gets spread around for political purposes, understand that at the heart of it, these individuals spend an enormous amount of personal time being here, and we do appreciate it when the community, once in a while, recognizes it.
Thank you. Any other board member wish to make a comment? If not, please state your name and address.
Hi, Susie Byrne, Fairfield. I actually was pleased to see that redistricting came up. Number one, because I've seen a lot of disputes on the board, and I thought it was kind of a good thing that you all were coming together, working towards like a bigger goal, trying to be prudent and look at cost issues and space issues and all the things that you as a board should do in your fiduciary responsibilities. It's disappointing that Mr. Convertito seems to have already made up his mind and that this is all just a waste of time, because I can tell you from my corner of the world, it is a big deal. And in 2003 or 4, I can't quite remember the dates, there was a redistricting done. I don't believe that that is a viable plan anymore. It obviously wasn't, because they had to do a mini redistricting in 2010 with the Fairfield Woods Middle School. I mean, we were at Fairfield Woods, now my daughter's at Tomlinson. There was a mini redistricting, that's a fact. There also was a redistricting with regards to the pre-K at Dwight School and at Burr School due to racial imbalance. It was put in there, as I understood it, to fix the racial imbalance. Those at the time, I said, and many other people said, were Band-Aid fixes to the redistricting plan that may need to be adjusted later on down the road, and this and that and the other thing. Now I hear Mr. Hutzelman, I think that's how you pronounce his name, and I totally get that Holland Hill may need to be renovated, and I totally get that it may need to be 504 students, but saying that the only way to move kids out of Osborne Hill is to put them to Riverfield is false. You could take pre-K out of Dwight, you could take pre-K out of Burr, and you could put that corner of the butterfly into Burr. I don't know all the numbers or how it works, but in addition, there are lots of other options that may or may not have been considered. There were like 5. I think the mini redistricting was option E at the middle schools. You know, I like that you've created a committee. I like that some on the committee are thinking seriously about it, because I live 3/4 of a mile from Dwight. We go to Burr, then we go to Tomlinson with kids who are bused right by Fairfield Woods to go to school with us. We share no borders with any of their districts. We don't walk to school. My kids take long bus rides. It's crazy. So while I appreciate that he likes walking, not everybody else gets to walk. And he's, you know, I came here to correct the record. When he says that no one wants redistricting, that's false. There are plenty of people that I know that he may not be talking to. And so I would like, if you guys are really serious about this redistricting mini, please make an attempt to talk to all the parents, not just the ones that can make a 7:30 meeting, because quite frankly, this wasn't advertised very well in any of the bulletins. It
Please,
wasn't.
please.
I didn't get one. I got one thing today. One. That's it. I'm sorry. I'm at Tomlinson. That's what I received. It was not in our Tomlinson blast 2 days ago, and I actually emailed the president of the PTA and said, could you add it? Because I had heard about it from somebody else.
Thank you.
Sorry to make you guys laugh. I know
No,
it's
no.
funny, but it's
no.
it's the truth.
And similar to my comment to the prior speaker about commenting about using a board member's name, if I could ask the audience also not to use a member of the public's name and address just the issue itself. Mr. Convertito, do you wish to go first?
No, I go. Well, he was just a prior speaker, so I thought I would. My turn.
It's
Use the
Mrs.
name.
Gerber's turn.
Okay, well, first of all, it wasn't a mini redistricting. It was a redistricting that took place because significant space was added to Woods. It was an entire middle school redistricting. A mini redistricting would be taking a handful of students from Holland Hill and putting them in Osborne Hill or Osborne Hill into Riverfield. So it was a full district, middle school level redistricting. And I do understand that, you know, for the students at Burr who went to Woods and now go to Tomlinson, that the bus ride is longer. I know one thing that some parents have said to me is that I know that you don't touch any of those schools geographically from the elementary school district, but all three of those schools go on to the same high school, as opposed to Woods, which splits. So you have two elementary school groups going to one and the other. It used to be that way at Roger Ludlow Middle School. So just wanted to put that out there. And in terms of not everyone can be walkers, yes, that is true. Not everyone who lives in Greenfield Hill can be walkers because there aren't sidewalks. Many people in Osborne Hill and Holland Hill and Sherman and Riverfield can be walkers because there are sidewalks, because they have neighborhoods that people chose to live in because of the neighborhood. They don't have 2-acre zoning. So they are able to walk to their schools. And I think it's important to, when we are able to, provide that for them.
Mr. Convertito, you raised your hand. Mr. Fattabine, Mrs. Maxon Cannella.
I can't do what you want to do with the charge that I was given. And I fully respect what you're saying and how that redistricting was done when Burr was brought online. I have no issues with any of the points that you've made. I can't do that with the charge that was given me, okay? And that's why this is a waste of time. If we want to go do a full top to bottom redistricting and align everything, that's the only way I can address those issues, because they're so embedded that I can't do anything with the charge. So I don't disagree with you, but I can't do what you want to do with the charge that was given us.
Mr. Fattabine.
I just want to make a point that there's other criteria other than sidewalks as to whether or not one's a walker.
For the audience who does not realize that Mr. Fattabine is well, for the rest of his life, as far as I'm concerned, there is a Transportation Safety Committee made up of board members, the fire department, the police department, emergency personnel, who address questions of whether this is a safe walking route or not. Mr. Fattabine is the longtime member of that group, so he speaks with some authority on that. Mrs. Maxon Cannelli.
Mrs. Gerber and Mr. Convertito already addressed some of my points, which is, I understand the idea of wanting a redistricting, but again, what you have expressed has absolutely nothing to do with how this got moved from a full board to an ad hoc committee, which is fiduciary responsibility that we need to fill seats. And so the issue of someone on this side of the street is going here or what have you, well, Mr. Convertito said it very well. You know, this wouldn't be addressed. Also, to the previous point of a previous speaker talking about walking to school and that you don't get to. It's a very different story in this town when we're talking about our elementary school neighborhood schools versus middle school. The point being our middle schools aren't where we need them to be, and that's just the way it goes. And we have to deal with that accordingly. My children go to Stratfield, and we are going all the way across town to Tomlinson. So I understand exactly what you're saying. I also I will say this, we've benefited though, in that at least now we get to be part of 3 schools who get to travel as a body to high school. But the point being, the buildings aren't where they are most convenient, and there's nothing we can do about that, because no one is suggesting that we just build a new school to address that. I don't believe anyone knew. So, you know, again, so to the issue of walkers, I mean, I think that is something, though, that is very important to this community, and that these guiding principles, to bring it back to our, you know, agenda topic, that we do respect the concept of neighborhood schools for elementary schools. That whole sense of community is so vital, especially at that younger age, where so many of us will rely on neighbors, what have you, for getting through those years and for all the help that that comes with. So I just think that that's important to split those two topics, that to the previous speaker's point, dealing with a walker, that's an elementary school issue, and there's just no way we can do that with the middle schools.
Can I just make a statement,
please
because
do.
I think I wasn't clear.
That's what this dialogue is for.
Thank you. When I said, you know, walkers or whatnot, what I meant was basically that we don't have a neighborhood school in my neighborhood. We don't have it. The northwest corner of Fairfield does not have a neighborhood school because it was taken away. So I thought that part of this redistricting plan was to take a look at the elementary school space, and I thought I read something about keeping neighborhood schools or what have you, and for the record, not everybody has a neighborhood school. It's a misnomer in the town, and to say that everybody does and to say we are a neighborhood school kind of town is false from my perspective, because we've lived it since 2004 when Burr opened. And we basically drive by Dwight to go to Burr, and then we drive all the way across town to go to Ward, which, you know, is a great school, but it just doesn't seem right. So if you're looking at redistricting, and I do happen to know there's pre-K at Dwight and there's pre-K at Burr, and so that came into play as a result of the racial imbalance, as I understood it at the time. And so if now what's coming into play as of May 20th is this racial imbalance as well, then that too should be looked at. And space might then open up for people in my neck of the woods to go to Dwight, and it just might push everything around, is all I'm saying. So please don't say it's a waste of time without looking at everything and looking what's at Dwight, looking what's at Burr, and who can move where. That's all.
And just to follow up on that, because I want to get back to the point, again raised by the previous speaker, that this ad hoc committee, it's solely looking at it for space capacity issues. And that I'm not saying that if there's a redistricting down the line that comes out of racial imbalance, that's not going to be the purview of this ad hoc committee. I don't know what actually would end up happening. Would that end up being a whole board discussion that we would have to wrestle with? What's the new racial imbalance plan that we will have to approve? Will a new subcommittee be formed in order to address the recommendations that the consultant comes back with, of which redistricting might only be one? I mean, we're paying them to come up with multiple options, as was the case when they were previously hired by Greenwich. It's multiple options, and the board wrestled with that and came to, this is what we would like to pursue, and this is what we are presenting to the state. But that, again, is a completely separate issue. Not to say that there isn't overlap of topics, but this ad hoc committee would not be addressing what you're discussing there.
Okay. Mrs. Lou McCormick, and then we'll move to the next speaker.
I do have to say, it's, I think, appreciated that you come and speak on behalf of a group of people who wouldn't necessarily come to a meeting like this. It's rare that you'll find somebody coming to a meeting to say, I want redistricting, as opposed to the slew of people.
I don't know, you don't live in my neck of the woods. I'm telling you, it's pretty common.
And so I think this shows just how large this town is, and that for every yes, there could be somebody on the other side who isn't experiencing that same experience. And so it would be presumptuous of us to take any, one single word or story as representing the entire body of our community. And you're right, we do need to be sensitive, because every time, as I think I tried to point out before, every time we do redistricting, somebody's going to be affected. And so even though it may not have been you this last time, the next time could be you, and just remember somebody was affected last time. And that person may be thrilled to have a change. And so as we do these, I mean, I have to imagine that even if we don't do it now, it will be looked at eventually in the future, because towns just do that over time as they evolve, like it or not, I believe. So in the spirit of what we're trying to do, which is to try to do what's best for the students, try to do what's best for the parents, try to figure out how to be fiscally responsible with the monies that we have, I think we always have to consider these. And since we are going to have a consultant anyways, it does seem like it's logical to at least get the information. And we don't know if it's going to confirm that we should build 550 schools. Who knows? But at least we have the information, and it should be considered. And if our commission statement isn't appropriate after we get the data, then perhaps some board down the line has to revisit it and write a new commission statement. I mean, it was done kind of, on the spot. And as we get more feedback from the public in forums like this, I think it's important to incorporate that into how we operate. So thank you very much.
So at this time, do either of at least one of the past board members wish to come forward? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll go right after Mrs. Sturrow.
Okay.
I
Please
wasn't
state your name and address.
I will. Trudy Durrell, Woodcrest Road, Fairfield. I wasn't going to come up and speak with you tonight, but I did feel it necessary, based on some of the previous comments from some of the board members, to point out that redistricting did not come up in May or June. I have the minutes from February 24th, in which redistricting was mentioned several times in reference to the discussion on the long-range facilities plan at that time. I remember sitting here in the audience, hearing it live, and I was able to find the minutes. So I just wanted to point that out, that in fact redistricting may have been looking at it, and the ad hoc committee may have happened in the June meeting, which was after the May 20th meeting and the May 6th letter from the state, but redistricting as an idea related to long-range facilities planning and space utilization and capacity and whatever other terms we want to put in there actually happened in the February meeting, and it happened again after that as well, but that was the first time, and it is in your minutes, and I felt that it was important to point that out. And also, I am, as a Holland Hill parent and as a person who has been in front of this board often to discuss it, I am a little concerned about constantly talking about redistricting and then somehow pairing that conversation with Holland Hill and or Mill Hill. The issues are, of course, somewhat related because they are now, but I would really like to try to keep the board's eye on the ball, which is that regardless of redistricting, both of those schools require a core facilities upgrade. Whether you redistrict or not, they need them. And most of you have already been to the schools, you've seen it, you know it, and of course, as a Holland Hill parent, I am going to advocate until my dying breath, or the time that it actually happens, that Holland Hill be first because of the urgent need that it is in. Thank you very much.
Thank
I'll
you.
sit here for a minute, just in
Please
case
si-
somebody
please
wants to
sign
bug
in.
me.
Mr. Convertito, I think you have the first response if you wish.
I think I've responded to Mr. L plenty of
Okay.
times, so I'll pass.
Mrs. Lou McCormick, Mr. Patton,
I have to
that's
say,
not raising your hand?
I-
Oh, it
I've
is
been-
raising your hand? Okay.
I've been incredibly impressed by the Holland Hill community and the passion for the school. And even though, as well, I was a Mill Hill parent as well, I mean, it was quite a showing of solidarity that you, as well as the staff there, came together. So I give you all credit, and I think
you.
it's been recognized and heard. So, you know, as I said to an earlier speaker, I think the board gets it, and I think everyone's in agreement. So I don't know if that makes you at ease or not, but everyone agrees that that core upgrade needs to happen, for sure.
I'm not questioning that. My concern is more with lumping it together with redistricting. That is my concern. Whether it be a member of the public or potentially a member of this board or some other body, it makes me and other fellow parents a little nervous, because then people who are not living at Holland Hill may misinterpret that redistricting is because Holland Hill needs a renovation, or that Holland Hill is somehow to blame for redistricting. So I just want to put it out there very clearly, that is not where that came from.
Mr. Patton? Yes, Mr. Patton.
I've been mulling over the waterfall chart since I knew what the heck a waterfall chart was 6 years ago, I guess. And I've followed the school construction projects fairly closely, including mental comments of, wow, can we really afford to spend X amount of millions of dollars within a 10-year period? Like, how does that work? How much does the town bond? And I spent many, many years learning about all that. So Holland Hill has been on my radar for a long time, especially since I visited the school for various events over the years, and recently this past year. And that not even include going to Holland Hill, not even because of the potential construction. So they're not related. That's all I want. In my opinion, they've not related. They've never been related. Holland Hill has been the next school that's been on tap for major renovations. In my opinion, they've always needed those renovations. It's come to a head in the last year to 2 years, and we need to move quickly. And as to when we can get those ed specs done and push this forward.
Yesterday, Mark. Yesterday.
It's on the radar. It's on the superintendent's radar. It's on the staff's radar. It's on the board's radar. trust me, there are conversations going on to see, looking at an overall schedule, how fast can we push this? It doesn't happen until everybody agrees. But in my opinion, those two are not related, even though they're happening at the same time.
Mr. Llewellyn.
Thank you very much. A couple comments. One is I appreciate you sitting here and saying that there has been a link created somewhere that is not necessarily real, because it's not. The core facility upgrades have to occur, and I think we've heard everyone say that. So there has been a link created out in the public that has resulted in misinformation getting out, but no one has challenged, that core upgrade. I think that if you go back to the minutes from 2010 and you look at the last upgrade, there was a member of the public who encouraged the board to look at all of the data, all of the capacity and costs analysis, and consider if your ultimate goal is a short-term fix to fill in, at this point, the middle schools for funding reasons, or is the ultimate goal to balance the K-12. And I think it's our charge to look at the information and make sure that we are doing what's prudent for the district, prudent for the kids, and prudent for the taxpayer. So I think that, the clarification, get that out to the community too. This redistricting is not being directed at Holland Hill or at Mill Hill or at any individual school. It's something that when you've got excess capacity in areas and deficiencies in other areas, you have to at least look at it before you go plow $25 million into something. But as we said at the last meeting, we should plow ahead with this. I mean, if we want to put portables out that are going to be there for a couple of years and start those in December, let's start them in December. Let's start them in January. At the end of the day, if it's $250,000 and that means we lose our state reimbursement for $60,000, you know what? Maybe we should all say, hey, let's put those in ahead of time and get those kids seats, because we know we're going to be doing that work out at Holland Hill.
Mr. Convertito, followed by Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, because Mr. Convertito deferred when he had a chance to go first.
I know I said I wasn't going to talk to you, but I have to now.
I'll take it.
My preferred track would be convene the administration to do an ed spec at the 462 level, which is what is in the 104 plan net now. By the time we go to ask for funding or that ed spec is approved, we will have the demographic forecast for whether we need a 462, a 481, or a 483, or 441 or 504 at that school. At least the ed specs will be in place and we can move forward in January. If this continues, we will lose a summer on Holland Hill, okay? 2 portable classrooms does nothing at Holland Hill. We are talking about a complete facility upgrade, okay? We might as well pitch tents, okay, if we're going to talk about putting portables out there. This board, for the last decade, has made a commitment to eliminating portable classrooms. And the reason, I will go back to it again, okay, you cannot move kids from Holland Hill, okay, under every guideline that this board has followed in the last 15 years, okay, and do it without crossing feeder patterns, disrupting neighborhoods, crossing main boundaries, okay? Even if we eliminated the pre-K at Burr and at Dwight, I wouldn't have enough seats to unload Osborne Hill to a 504, which means I got to get it to 450, okay? That's 130 seats I have to move out of there. You cannot do it with redistricting. Get the ed specs, determine in January whether it's a 462 or a 504, and move forward.
Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
Sometimes I feel like I've been at different meetings than other people.
I think we've been at the same meetings.
Yes, and to both Mr. Patton's point and Mr. Llewellyn's point, I'm going to tell the story that I've heard, which is at odds with the story they just told. The redistricting conversation happened because we were discussing the population of 2 schools which currently do not fit in their brick and mortar structure. The redistricting was discussed as a means of alleviating that population and moving those bodies to schools where they were perceived as openings. So to Mr. Patton's point, of course they're together. I agree. We all agree the core facility needs to be done. Absolutely. As of the unanimous vote of our, 801 vote for our long-range facility plan, we all agree that Holland Hill is next. So the Holland Hill core facility upgrade has the stamp of approval of this board. What absolutely is in this discussion is, do we expand it? When Mr. Convertito speaks about a 504 platform, that's not talking about the classrooms, that's talking about the platform comes with the dedicated spaces that he referenced. But whether we expand it to 504 capacity, which would indicate 24 classrooms, or we expand it to 20 classrooms, came out of this year-long discussion of the long-range facilities plan. So for anyone to say, pat, Mrs. Darrell, don't you worry about Holland Hill, well, maybe the building, no. But the people who currently called Holland Hill home absolutely need to pay attention to this discussion, because they are the names who are on the table when we are talking about the potential of, do we do something to the elementary school attendance boundary lines? And to Mr. Convertito's point that it cannot be done with a certain guiding principles, keep in mind, we haven't voted on these yet. And so whether it comes out of our discussion tonight, or whether the next board in November, when it comes to voting on this, says, in fact, we don't subscribe to neighborhood schools. And I do hear the previous speaker's point. When you look at this map, it's very easy to understand why, for this side of town, they don't have the benefit of that same neighborhood school community. Very true. The geography of it is very different. The zoning of it is very different. But if you look for the entire rest of the town, the neighborhood schools have a very dear meaning. That to just violate that in the interest of the others, that is why I support the guiding principle, which puts neighborhood schools as the #1 priority. I support that. But I don't want anyone on this board running away from redistricting came up because we need to address, do we move Mill Hill students out of Mill Hill to another school? Do we move Holland Hill students out of Holland Hill and make a smaller school? If someone's heard a different story than me, please correct me, but that is the story I've heard, and I don't want to hear it get fuzzed some other way, because that is disingenuous to the public.
Please, if I could ask you to allow the conversation to continue. Mr. Llewellyn.
So the clarification around the expansion was not, will there be an expansion? It's how big will the expansion be? So it was never redistricting kids out of Holland Hill. From my perspective, it was, do we add 2 classes, 4 classes, 6 classes? We have a 10-year projection that was done a year ago that says the highest number of students at Holland Hill will be 438. So the question was, if the highest projections we have are 438, do we really need to have capacity for 504 students? So it was picking the correct size to build to, not do we build or not build. That is from my perspective.
I just have one quick follow-up.
Excuse me,
please.
let me first. We're getting close to the 10-minute mark, so if I could have Mrs. Maxon-Connelly and Mrs. Gerber make the last 2 comments and then move on to the next speaker.
And I absolutely hear Mr. Llewellyn's point, and that's, again, where these guiding principles are vital, because these guiding principles indicate that 90% mark, which if this board supports that, then building to a 462, do the math, means that if you have a 430 population, you have exceeded the 90% capacity, which means that's an indication that that school needs to be redistricted if we don't renovate and expand accordingly. So I just want to repeat, these can't be separated. It's, yes, we absolutely are in agreement that it needs to be renovated. The question is regarding the expansion, and therefore that goes right hand in hand with the issue of redistricting.
Mr. Dwyer, am I allowed to speak before Mrs. Gerber does?
Absolutely, that's the format that we've had.
Thank
If you
you.
wish to make a comment.
I also would like to point out 2 things. The projections that were used are, of course, in fact, old, and we know that new projections are coming, and it will be interesting to see what those are, because as we know, Holland Hill has bucked every single one of those numbers every year for the past 5 years. So that is a major concern. And the other thing I would like to point out in terms of redistricting, if it should happen, as a reminder, Holland Hill is an early start school, and that could be an impact for several parents, because it is the only early start school in town, and it is quite advantageous for the majority of parents who attend a Title I school, whether or not you are a Title I
the parent of a Title I student is immaterial.
Right.
Sorry.
Thank you. Mrs. Gerber. And then we'll move on to the next speaker.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that the numbers, the Holland Hill enrollment projections do put them at that 85 to 90% capacity headroom that the consultants were asked about, and that is discussed here, so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Past board member and current member of the, well, moderator of the RTM, but still state your name and address, and you are still limited to 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Pamela Iacono. I live on Fife Road. I do currently serve on the representative town meeting for District 9. I am currently in the role of moderator. And I was on this board when many of the things that you're discussing this evening were voted upon, were discussed. And I said at the districting subcommittee meeting that those that do not understand history are doomed to repeat it. I find it so disingenuous that people do not understand what we have gone through in this town with closing schools, reopening schools, and spending more money. I was a parent who co-founded the Fairfield Schools Place Coalition with Mr. Tim Carey, Steve Palmer, and Jessica Gerber, along with many other parents who jumped on board to get you the very documents you are working with now. Please stop reinventing the wheel. You are chasing a ball that we fixed this problem. We laid the groundwork for you. Please stick with the plan. You're disrupting everything. I can't believe I'm turning on the TV and having to hear parents talk about kids in closets still. This has been advocated for, voted on, vetted, and approved. And you're going backwards. 11 years I worked on that Riverfield projects. That's how long it takes to get a school done from start to finish. 11 years. And no, we don't have extra seats, Mr. Llewellyn. We are right where we need to be.
If I could ask
Sorry,
you not
I
to
stepped
state
out
a
of bounds.
person's name. Thank you.
The point is, you're going to need the 504 at Holland Hill. I disagree with the 462. I not only disagree with the 462, but so do the Republican majority leader and deputy majority leader of the RTM, who are both running unopposed this term and will be back. Several leading members of the Board of Finance are willing to support a 504 because there are so many of us in public service that spent time saying no more Band-Aids, do it right once and get it done. So if you shortcut this now, you're cutting off your nose to spite your face. I'm going to admit a letter from the deputy moderator and moderator into evidence.
Then submit it to Mr. Fatterbean. He's the attorney.
Yes. I'm sorry, into the record.
Please continue.
There's more than one attorney on this board.
They want, sorry, into the record. I just want to quote one piece of it, if I may, if you could, and this is from...
You're almost out of time.
Okay. When these revisions were reviewed recently at the Board of Finance's Capital Planning Summit, Republican RTM Majority Leader Edward Bateson voiced his objection to the change and publicly requested that the Board of Ed reconsider its approach, and today calls on the Board of Ed to reinstate a renovated capacity level of 504 students at both Holland Hill and Mill Hill. Deputy Majority Leader Michael Hurley shares Bateson's concern about the ramifications of the BOE's modified approach. While some members of the BOE postulate that redistricting may be a prudent approach to solve school capacity issues, RTM Republican leadership believes that it is a short-sighted approach that lacks even-handedness. And I'll go so much farther to say that this is not a partisan issue at all. This is bipartisan. This is not about Republicans or Democrats.
Can you
People
wrap
just-
up, please?
People just don't want to waste money.
Thank you. Mr. Fatterbean, you're up first if you wish. If not,
Thank you. Well, that
You're
was
running
very-
unopposed too, Mr. Fatterbean.
Mr.
That's
Fatterbean,
true.
feel free to comment.
Everything you said is certainly true, and I was an advocate there with you on many of those occasions. And I do recall the RTM in the past including you, in instance, not supporting school budgets in some cases and advocating for cuts. I was an advocate of opening Oldfield, if you recall, and I was on that space committee with Mr. Flato. And Mr. Flato had his own ideas about space in school, as you know, some of which were disagreed with. You mentioned 2 members on the RTM who advocate in a certain position. As you know, the RTM is going to comprise 40 members, all of whom, I'm sure, are not going to have the same position. So you're going to have convince 40 members, not just the 2, on how to proceed. And my concern, as always, is funding. Do we have the money? Can we get the money? Are the money going to be appropriated? You and I know that getting monies appropriated is not always easy, and there are challenges. Wanting it does not get it done. So my concern, as always, is can we get the appropriations to do this? And if we can't get the appropriations to do what we want, what has to be cut? And that's often a difficult decision, one this board has faced in the past, and I don't like the cuts. And the chair can advocate on how, in the very few occasions that I have gotten upset on this board, of 2, one of which involved cuts, the other of which involved amendments to the bylaws. So I don't know what more further I can say, but
May I respond to that, please?
Yes, there are other members of the board who wish to comment as well. If not, please do.
First of all, there's something very different from your operating budget versus your capital request. And my voting record has always 100% supported capital requests. Further, history shows us, as written in this statement from the majority leader, I cannot recall one fully vetted elementary school renovation project from the long-term facilities plan that was presented to the RTM for funding that did not ultimately receive approval, with many of these renovations receiving near unanimous support. So a capital request is completely different from an operating budget request. Secondly, they do not need, as leadership, to convince 40 members to vote for something. They need to convince 21 because it's a majority rule.
Thank you. Other board members wish to comment on this subject? No, thank you for coming forward.
Thank you.
Another member of the public wish to come forward? You'll wait, okay, please. State your name and address.
Hold on, I just got to write it down. My name's Adam King. I live at 1084 Uncle Road. I'm an educator in a school district in New York State. I worked there for 18 years. I've never heard it brought up, redistricting in my district. Also, just to go towards something, I work in a magnet school where students from all over the district have the opportunity to come to our school. It helps to work out the racial imbalance in our district. The guiding principles, which are, are going to be voted on, but not until it comes back about the racial imbalance. So that's just the one question that I have about that. But then the other thing that I wanted to let you know is that in the middle of August, my school, a ceiling collapsed. Thank God there were no students or faculty in that building. Anyone who would have been in that classroom would have been deceased. In 3 weeks, we were able to relocate all 530 students to a new school, and we are functioning in that school at 100% capacity in that new facility. It happens to be a parochial school that was no longer used. These are the sorts of options that could happen for Holland Hill or Mill Hill if need be, as opposed to having to redistrict to get 30 or 50 or whatever students out. I just wanted to get my piece out there, and I'm open to any comments.
Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, I think you have the first choice today.
I guess I have two reactions to that. Well, three, I guess. Thank goodness no one was there. But what you point to in terms of flexibility, while no, I don't think we anticipate ceilings caving in, the notion of flexibility is absolutely an integral part of these guidance principles, which is why I support them as they came out of the committee. That idea of the 90% is that idea that we need space to move. When we have, for example, an overly large class and suddenly instead of 4 classrooms needed for a grade that we need 5, that there is that room, knowing another grade maybe they will drop to 3, but that's the ebb and flow of what we have here. And knowing how volatile what it can be with housing in terms of new housing developments, et cetera, in Fairfield, we don't know what's going to happen 5-10 years down the road. I keep setting myself up to talk about previous speakers, but to the previous speaker's point of thinking long-term and not costing ourselves money by not understanding the history of what's going on with Fairfield. We need that flexibility that you reference. Second, I'm not sure if I heard you correctly. If you commented that the timing of the voting on these guiding principles would occur after the racial imbalance. Is that what you said?
I guess you're going to vote on these in November.
Yes.
Right? Well,
that's my understanding.
Well, half of you won't be here, or not. Some of us aren't going to be here.
It will not be the same body of 9.
Then that's
Let's
another.
think
That's
more
another.
optimistically than
That's
that.
another. That's another issue altogether. Where I would even want to approach the school district and say, why are we voting in a new board in November? Our school runs from September to June. Why aren't we having our vote in May? Which would be more logical. You guys have been here for the past many years, and issues are coming up, and some of you won't be here to vote on them in 3 weeks. So I don't know. It's just another thing to point out.
I'll leave that for another town body, another town charter movement. But again, just to the point that the vote on the guiding principles will be prior to the report coming in from the racial imbalance consultant.
But then you'll use these guiding principles, and then the racial imbalance will basically guide whether or not you have to use them.
So these guiding principles are for...
I wonder if the chair...
I'm going to repeat the point I've said a couple of times, and then I'm happy to defer to Mr. Convertito, but that these guiding principles are for 2 separate purposes, that while they keep getting forced together in the conversation, they are in fact 2 separate purposes, one of which is for the redistricting ad hoc committee, which is looking at redistricting as an option to address space, as has come up due to the conversation about the population at Holland Hill and Mill Hill. So these guiding principles would then be guiding the conversation of any redistricting plan that come out of the ad hoc committee to address that. Separately, once these were voted on, they would go to the racial imbalance, so any redistricting recommendation that they came up with would have to adhere to these guiding principles. So it's, again, 2 separate things, thus the importance of our having a town hall meeting, because if anyone out there does disagree with any of the guiding principles, I know in particular that's something that I would want to hear tonight. If people agree with them, that's also something I would like to hear, because if we in some way, if somehow the ad hoc committee was off the mark, if somehow the 9 of us are off the mark in terms of these guiding principles, that's really, very much what I'm hoping to hear tonight.
Thank you. Mr. Convertito, do you wish to make further comment?
Sure. Mr. King, you bring up 2 very important underlying issues, and one is the guiding principles, as Ms. Kennelly has outlined them, hold 2 purposes, and in that lies our pitfall, okay? This board or the future board will have to pass those guidelines for the consultant for the racial imbalance, okay? Because the racial imbalance consultant may have a redistricting plan that solves the racial imbalance. The pitfall is if you go forward with redistricting and the redistricting committee says, I got the perfect plan, here it is, and a month later the consultant comes out and says, I have the perfect plan for your racial imbalance, you have 2 trains heading towards each other on the same track. okay? The other issue that you bring up, and it is not something new to this school district, we lost a school 10 years ago, Mr. Carey? When McKinley
He's throwing out a
rotted down around
lifeline
us?
to you, Mr. Carey.
Okay, 15 years ago, okay? We came within 6 inches of losing another school 3 years ago this month. 6 inches in Hurricane Sandy would have wiped out 488 seats in this school south of the Post Road at Sherman School, okay? So when people talk about excess capacity, we're talking about flexibility and contingency. So you bring up two very distinct points that nobody seems to want to talk about.
Other comments, Mrs. Gerber, and then Mr. Fattabine.
Yeah, well, when you're talking about using, excess space to help get the children in other schools, we actually had a possible scenario happening at Osborne Hill 3 years ago when PCBs were discovered in the gym and in the air in the library, and so the gym and the library were closed, but there were also concerns about whether or not the school itself would be able to open. I mean, this all came about the summer before school was taking place. So basically, and Osborne Hill is one of the larger elementary schools, so there was more of an issue in terms of space, but I can't even remember. I think half of the students were going to be going to St. Emery's and half were going to be going to Holy Family, I believe, but it just showed how little space we had to be able to deal with that, and luckily it didn't come to pass because they were able to get the school up and running, at least functional enough to have the students there. But nonetheless, that really was illustrative to me, at least, about the fact that we do not have excess space. And obviously, you're hoping that you're not going to be dealing with a school having to be closed. And I'm not saying we need to have 500 seats because Osborne Hill is a 504 school, but nonetheless, that really showed to me how little space we have.
Mr. Fattabine.
Certainly, the racial imbalance and the potential redistricting is intertwined, and that's even the case as I understand the consultant's agreement. There's different phases, phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1, according to the agreement, as I understand it, was against the proposal, I assume that went to agreement, that they will develop up to 3 upper-level redistricting scenarios that aim to address racial imbalance at McKinley School. That's phase 1. And that comes before phase 2. And phase 2 will then be six detailed elementary school redistricting scenarios is what they, up to 6, what they will provide, scenarios of different redistricting. So I think, in my opinion, the racial imbalance and the potential redistricting, and everything's potential now, it's just looked into, goes hand in hand with the committee's charge. The committee's charge is to efficiently, in essence, efficiently utilize elementary school space. Now, it wouldn't be an efficient, appropriate use of elementary school space unless you also accommodate or consider racial imbalance. So even though the charge does not specifically indicate racial imbalance, in my opinion, it's certainly broad enough to say that any efficient use of elementary school space is going to have to consider, if it's appropriate use of elementary school space, racial imbalance. So I would advocate, although I certainly won't see it, is that whatever the committee comes back with, that it inherently has to include a plan for racial imbalance, because we're mandated to do that by the state, and if it deems appropriate, under their purview, to recommend any other possible redistricting to more efficiently utilize elementary school space. It may or may not happen. I think we don't know where it's going yet. That's why there's a committee. So that's my...
Mrs. Lou McCormick, did you want to comment or not?
Well, I think Mr. Fattabine laid it out pretty clearly. In terms of the timeline, I think the response on the redistricting has to go back to the state by March. So that's pretty imminent. But I think our criteria, though, that we submitted is being used for both purposes. Am I correct? It's going to be used for both the racial imbalance work as well as for any possible efficiency. So this is it's kind of like what you get a 2-for-1 on the information that the consultant can provide for us. And it may be that he can't find a good solution to either of them, but he's really not charged with trying to find a good redistricting overall solution for us. He's really charged with the racial imbalance for now. So it's kind of like it's almost premature. Do you know what I'm saying?
But doesn't that, I mean, the racial imbalance needs to be taken into consideration.
Yes, has to be.
At the forefront, because that's what's going to really guide the redistricting in the long run.
Thank you. Mrs. Gottlieb, you were coming forward when you deferred to a member of the public. Do you wish to come forward? And Mrs. Maxon Connolly wishes to make one comment as you
Just
come
very
forward.
quickly, again, to the speaker's just point, to Mrs. Lou McCormick's point, the ad hoc redistricting committee does not have racial imbalance within the charge statement. It is not. Now, if you want to do what the initial speaker recommended, and with the next board disband the committee and then wait, that's another vehicle. But this ad hoc committee is not considering racial imbalance in its work. It's not considering it in its discussion. And we can't keep conflating them because you're misrepresenting the work to the public.
Thank you. Mrs. Gottlieb.
Julie Gottlieb, Applegate Road. I am also currently on the RTM for District 6 and running for re-election in the new District 4. I'm also the Deputy Minority Leader of the Democratic Caucus on the RTM. And I wanted to follow up on Ms. Iacono's comments. To back up a little bit, prior to my tenure on the RTM, I've served 2 terms now and running for 3rd because I'm insane. I started out when Stratfield was the school on the table, when we had art in a cart and music in the cafeteria, and my son received special ed services in a hall with a blanket tacked up so that nobody could see him, which I think is actually better than some people have had in Riverfield and now in Holland Hill. And that is, I suppose, when I got the bug and started attending meetings and hearing about redistricting, hearing some of the plan that Ms. Iacono mentioned, and then sort of graduated to Mr. Carey's presentations in that tiny little room in Fairfield Ward High School where you had spreadsheet after spreadsheet after spreadsheet of orphans, and if we move this here and this piece here and this piece here, and we had A and B and C and D, and I think it went down to K. I forget how far down it went. And I have to agree with Ms. Iacono that I am, and I'm sure some of the people sitting behind me and people watching from home, that we are hearing the same things again and again. Like my counterparts across the aisle on the RTM, and I can speak for myself as the Deputy Minority Leader, I cannot speak for the Minority Leader himself because he is finishing his term. But we are in agreement. We do have a record of supporting capital projects. If you go back and you look at Osborne Hill, at Stratfield, at Riverfield, at the Ward Roof, at Ludlow, I was scribbling them all down. Osborne Hill, remediation of PCBs in various places, those have been approved. It seems to be one of the few places where we can actually agree without a lot of rancor. And while there may be some disagreement on then funding the budget to operate those buildings, that we have done that. And there has been, I mean, speaking to the meeting a month ago, the capital planning meeting, speaking to the various things that we have discussed, there was support for this. There was support for this. There's an election in 2 weeks. There will be new faces sitting here. I could not be sitting, I'll still be sitting here. I might not have the same title, but I'll still be sitting here. And the people that may have approved it may not be in office. And I think you missed a real opportunity to fix Holland Hill.
Please sign in if you will, and then stay in case there's conversation back and forth.
I forgot I'm not used to staying.
And I think we're up to Mr. Llewellyn. Any other board members that wish to make a comment at this time?
Good. Everybody wants to go home.
No. Mr. Patton did. Please do.
Oh, Mark, come on.
Do you want me to comment or you want to go
It
home?
can be a short comment. You don't need to make a long comment.
Of course.
If you wish to make a comment, please do.
I've known Julie too long. I basically just wanted to say that I agree with what you're saying, and with an election coming up, I would more along the line say that whether we missed an opportunity or not to approve something a certain way, that to other people's points, the people who are supporting the Holland Hill project, or, regardless of redistricting, may not be in the same positions in 2 weeks. So that's very important. I'd also just quickly like to clarify my comments to a previous speaker's question that Ms. Maxon Kennelly commented on the relationship between Holland Hill and redistricting when I said they were not related. I still stand by that because my point is that the two projects are not related. How the redistricting committee came up and the subject came up, certainly those are related exactly to her point. But it was never in my mind an issue whether we were going to consider redistricting as just exploring some options to save, to explore cost-cutting measures that Holland Hill would or would not get done. That was never in my thoughts.
Any other board members wish to make a comment? Mr. Fattabine?
I'll just make a comment. I certainly agree that in the past, the town has been supportive of, it's always been supportive of education as far as I was concerned. And they've been very supportive in funding a lot of the capital projects. However, there are some that didn't get that same funding support, one of which is Oldfield. I advocated strongly to open up Oldfield as another elementary school. That didn't happen. The funding was not there to do that, in the sense that the funding to renovate that school for elementary school was too much. It was not palatable.
Because of the
We've
flood.
also had the discussion whether to build brick or mortar schools or a more cost-effective pod structure. And in some situations, the pod structure prevailed, and the brick and mortar was considered too expensive. So I certainly agree. The town has been supportive of capital projects, but there have been some in which have been under pressure and have had reduced cost. And in my experience, there's always the debate of getting the funding, and getting the funding is not an absolute guarantee.
No, no. That's a fair enough point. I'll qualify that to my past experience then.
Other board members wish to make a comment? We're at the 10 o'clock hour. Are there other members of the public that wish to come forward? We have 1, 2, 3. Can I say that those are the last three? Can I say those are the last three? There's a fourth now? 1, 2, 3, 4. Can we get agreement that 4 more speakers and that's it? Fair enough, please. Mr. Carey?
Can I just say as I walk away, John, it's been a real pleasure, and we're going to miss you, and I'm going to miss addressing you here on this board.
Mr. Carey, please state your name and address. You have the same rules. You're still confined to 3 minutes.
Is there a PowerPoint?
I make a motion to extend past 11. No? No one wants to stay that long?
No PowerPoint?
Good evening, Tim Carey, 7 Green Acre Lane. I'd like to start by thanking you all for your service to your community. I am acutely aware of the time and energy that you have to put into this. So thank you all for that. I'm also here this evening because I do have some concerns, and my concerns are many. Before I get into those, I want to address a few things I've heard here real quickly, though. First of all, I think it's important when we have a sensitive and emotional discussion like redistricting that the board members state things clearly and accurately, because your facts are going to be checked, okay? So one thing I heard this evening is we have 20% capacity at Riverfield, and that's not accurate, because if you are going to redistrict based on your rules of 90%, you currently have 408 students in that school as of October 15th. 453 is 90% capacity of 504, which means you have room for 46 students, or 9.12%. That's an important distinction, 11% difference. So we have to be clear when we're stating things to the public. Secondly, I'm happy to hear that the majority of the board supports Holland Hill. And understanding your rules, I'm sure 3 of you can make a motion for the next meeting to put it on the agenda, and I'd implore you to approve it as a 504 school. So those are my quick comments based on reaction to what I've heard. Here's my concerns, and I'm going to address this to the 4 members who we know are going to be here. And I'll actually excuse Mr. Patton, as I've seen him around long enough. You have to think about this historically from a long-term perspective. And I'm going to share some history with you to help you understand this, because there's a lot of history that's missing here that I'm hoping we can fill in my last minute and 20 seconds. All right? So a lot of times in this town, we've done things because enrollment's been going down. All right? Enrollment's receding.
In 1979, we closed 4 of our 12 elementary schools because enrollment was receding. 2 of those elementary schools do no longer exist in our inventory because one became an assisted living center, another became the senior center. Lo and behold, 5 years later, we had an elementary school space program. We had to reopen Mill Hill. Within the next 10 years, we had to reopen Osborne Hill. By 1999, 2 years later, we had an emergency situation with capacity at the elementary level, and we had to open up and move people into 10 portables and start Burr. But the emergency happened in 2000 because we weren't planning properly. We weren't following our plan and upgrading cores of schools. And one had a huge health disaster. And McKinley had to be raised. And more than 20 classrooms worth of children were put in APRs and libraries and gymnasiums for more than a year while that new school was being built. Okay, so I'm running out of time. Fast forward to the end. Here's the story. You have to look at this in a 20 to 30 year perspective. You do. You have to look at the ebbs and flows of the evolution of your demographics here. We're not going to be going down in enrollment. I'm sorry. Your plan right now from 14 says you have a 1 to 2% deviation. That's not enough to be looking at this type of move. Redistrictings happen in this town when schools are open and closed. Now, if you do want to redistrict, the one thing you really got to look at.
Last sentence, please.
Last sentence? Okay. If you do want to redistrict, what you really have to consider is the planning principles that were put before you. They were designed to help you avoid the problems of the past. And what I'll say to the parents in the room behind me is the facilities planning principles, not what they're discussing this evening, are an obligation to this board, and I would hold their feet to the fire, the next board, to ensure they stick to them. Because if they're leaving and abandoning those principles, we're going to repeat the mistakes of the past. So you should have a good reason why they're not going to follow them. Thank you very much.
At the potential of having Mrs. Maxon Kennelly correct me, I'll consider that to be a run-on sentence. I think we're back to Mrs. Eileen Lou McCormick, if you wish to make an initial comment.
Thank you for the historical perspective. And what I took away from that is make sure you follow plan and do your diligence. So, thank you.
Other board members that wish to make a comment? Nope. Thank you, Mr. Kerry. Oh, Mr. Fatterbean.
I thank Mr. Kerry for his continued interest in education, certainly, after being a board member. I know prior to his experience on the board and during his experience on the board, even after his experience on the board, he has been an advocate of education in the town, and I appreciate that, and I've always enjoyed listening to Mr. Kerry speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Patton.
Just quickly, I'll echo Mr. Fatterbean's comments. I'm disappointed there's no PowerPoint or a spreadsheet, as I was interrupting before. And I look forward to hearing more insights from you in the coming years. Don't go away.
Thank you. That's enough accolades for you at the moment. Thank you very much for coming and speaking.
Thank you all for your
time. Who wishes to come forward now?
Hi, my name's Gary Corrigan of Fairfield. In the spirit of earlier, talked about rumors that were sort of going around. So I just have a pretty simple question. One of them is if redistricting was ever voted upon to move forward, I've been hearing that Dwight would be shut down. So can you shed any light on that?
I've heard that too. I don't know where that came from. I've never heard of Dwight closing down, but you know what? Oh, I'm so sorry. He was looking at me, so I spoke. I retract that comment, and I'll defer to Mr. Patton.
Mr. Patton, you have the first dibs this time.
I wasn't trying to be a pain. Basically, we should, I've just like the other two rumors that Mrs. Gerber had said before. I have not heard that at all. I don't know where that came from, but that is not in the realm of possibility at this point by, I don't think, the staff or the board.
At this point.
In other words, it's never come up for discussion. So, you know, we anything is possible. You know, we could add 3 more schools. But
Mrs. Gerber.
Yeah, I don't see how it could possibly happen, especially because Dwight actually got a couple of additional sections near the last minute. So, and again, I just want to address the idea that we have empty seats. I know that's something that people like to talk about, empty seats. And I think that you have to qualify that by actually looking at the schools themselves to see how many sections they have. That's the important part. For instance, McKinley has 418 students in it, I believe. It's a 504 school. So technically you could say they have 86 empty seats, which sounds really tempting. But you look at the number of sections they have 24 sections. They have 24 regular classrooms. So if you moved any students there, you could potentially end up moving, having to reclaim space from someone else and then providing services in inappropriate spaces. So, you know, I know people make it sound like there are tumbleweeds going through Dwight. I don't believe that is the case. So I just think it's very easy to say we have all these empty seats. And it makes it sound like a school is one big room with 504 chairs in it. And you just plunk the children in to the empty chairs. But I think you need to look at how the sections break down and how the classroom space is used. And I think that that's something that's very important keeping in mind in terms of what our space issues are in this town with our elementary schools.
Mrs. Lou McCormick, you withdrew a comment out of respect for Mr. Patton going first. Did you want to go back to whatever you were saying?
Actually, I had already said it, so.
Okay, fair enough. Mr. Fattabine, followed by Mrs. Maxon Cannella.
Yeah, I never heard anything about closing Dwight. And in fact, when I was supportive of looking into redistricting, at least looking into it, my understanding and belief was that, that we had to do something about the racial imbalance to begin with. So we had to possibly do some redistricting in the beginning. So the thought was that we do have some, apparently because our enrollment had actually declined in elementary school, you have some potential inequities or some schools overcrowded, some schools not having that extent of crowding, so that you can maybe tweak the lines to some degree. And a tweak, in a sense, my understanding would be small modifications to try and balance things out a little more. We had renovated 5 schools, and we have 6 schools that are over 504 capacity. 5 are 504, and I think Osborne Hill is 535 capacity. So you have fairly newly renovated schools that have capacity that some, with other facilities, not quite as nice possibly. And before we get time to renovate those, perhaps you can do a little tweaking to balance it out and get some more efficiencies in those already 504 newer schools. So that was what I envisioned for redistricting. Never to close a school. And obviously, for the record, I've always been an advocate of neighborhood schools. So my envision would not to be close a school, but always advocate for neighborhood schools. So the more schools you have, in my opinion, the better. My concern in general is that if you build every school to a larger capacity, at some point in the future, you may close a school, and that would defeat the purpose of having a neighborhood school. Because if you close a school, you're going to have to go further to another school, which may or may not be your neighborhood. So that's my concern in the long run. But of course, it may not matter.
Mrs. Maxon Cannelli, followed by Mr. Convertito.
I hadn't heard quite that rumor. The rumor I'd heard, and I didn't bother voicing it because I discounted it and spoke as such to a Dwight parent, was simply that how much would Dwight be affected by the work of this redistricting committee? And no, I could not assure that parent that nothing would happen because I don't know the nature of what they were looking at in terms of moving bodies around. I mean, there has been conversation in this room of 100 empty seats at Riverfield. Again, going to 100% capacity, which I don't believe anyone is advocating for because no one has spoken yet about the guiding principle, which indicates 90%. But if there's a conversation where something like Riverfield is looked at as having 100 empty seats, as Mill Hill is having almost eventually 80 seats, I don't know what how that attitude that redistricting committee will have towards that. I assume that they would not, because I have not, well, actually, I apologize. Mr. Convertito did say that the one source of contention in the redistricting committee was regarding that 90%. So if that's something which is considered to be on the table, I don't know if they wouldn't look to put more people in a building. I don't know. I guess I would only say is that it's obviously of the essence that, as to again reference a previous speaker, that people maintain their vigilance about what the board is having as a discussion on this. Because again, with new bodies up here and the conversation continuing and the work of that redistricting committee not done, I think it is premature for anyone at this board to promise and assure you, while it may not have been a topic of conversation, I have certainly heard conversations that touched upon that. So I don't support that idea, but I completely agree with Mr. Fadabine in terms of it's far better to keep it open and to keep the school in that area. But to say that you are completely out of bounds from the conversations that have been taking place, I don't think is being completely honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's one thing to do redistricts, another to completely shut a school down, and you know, it sounds to me in this discussion like there's been thought of it, so hopefully that will not happen.
Mr. Confortito.
I can tell you, we didn't have any of those discussions in our redistricting committee meeting. And if you look at the map, closing Dwight would necessitate busing kids inordinate amount of time. In an inordinate amount of time, okay? We just spent, what, $3.5 million putting a roof on a place? Plus new solar panels, plus it's in the waterfall schedule for another $4.3 million in upgrades, okay? The problem you have with Dwight when you talk about redistricting is if we stick to our core planning facility principles, we can't move anybody in there because it still hasn't had the core upgrades. So it goes back to my previous issue of if you stick to what we believe in, okay, I can't solve the other problem because even though you may have some excess capacity, because I don't think you have anything significant excess capacity, okay, I still can't use it because my core planning facility principles say don't put anybody in there until we upgrade those core facilities. So no, like I said, if you take that school away, you're going to have kids on 45, 50-minute bus rides to get to, you know, kindergarten. I mean, that's absurd because of where it's located. So no, we've never discussed it, and that's where I'll leave it.
So spread the word. Any other comments from board members? If not, I'll invite the next speaker to come forward. Please state your name and address.
Sarah Weiland, Hill Farm Road. To follow up on the Dwight rumor, because I'm a Dwight family as well, I was told they were thinking about closing it to switch it to an ECC and central office to move there. We were told it was in the long-term facility plan. Obviously, that document's very long, so no one's actually read the whole. I mean, you guys probably have, but we haven't.
Well, my copy?
No. So
And
that
it's on
is
the
where I have heard that as well. So I'm glad that has been dispelled. Second statement is just, I keep hearing that we want to maintain neighborhoods, and I understand that walkers are neighborhoods as such as Sherman and Riverfields, but up at Dwight and Burr, even though there's a previous speaker saying that up in that area they are against redistricting, I mean, they're for redistricting. I know myself being in the area, amongst several others who are here tonight, we definitely do not want redistricting, and even though we are not a walking school, I still think we have a strong sense of neighborhood, and so just because we don't walk there, I know majority of the children be affected by not having the kids they go to school with and changing lines. So that's my statement. But so my question is, after sitting here all night, I feel like we've heard racial balancing and Holland Hill and redistricting. And at times you have said they all depend on each other. At times you've said they're all independent of each other. And after sitting here for 3 hours, I feel like I'm leaving still not knowing what's going on. Because half of you say, well, we all want to build Holland Hill, but we're still going to redistrict. And we need a racial balance, but it has nothing to do with redistricting. That's just titles charge. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure if you guys need more to do with your time, some of you, and just have decided to like look at redistricting for fun. Because obviously you've got the whole town fired up. You can't go to a soccer game without being the entire conversation. So I'm just confused after sitting here for 3 hours if it's racial balancing, if it's Holland Hill, or if it's redistricting, or when the new members come on the board in 3 weeks, redistricting is gone. And this whole 2-month fiasco is behind us because we now have people realizing that they obviously have better things to do with their time than this.
Thank you. Ms. Carnell, I think it's your first effort if you wish to start a comment. No? Other board members wish to comment? Mr. Convertito.
Yes, 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 and no. I can tell you what my understanding is, and that doesn't mean that 8 other people don't have a different understanding, as I've learned. The consultant for racial imbalance will be looking at redistricting as an option to solving that, okay? There may or may not be a redistricting solution to that, okay? But in order for him to do his due diligence so that we can report back to the state that says we have looked at these options, okay, he will have to look at that. He may have another option that works, that we don't have to go to redistricting, okay? But, and if he doesn't have another, and here's the other scenario to that, if he doesn't have another option that works, and only redistricting works, and the town says we're not doing it, at least we have done our due diligence. We go back to the state and say we need more time to figure this out because this isn't going to fly with our people and we need to do something else, okay? So that's the racial imbalance side of that, okay? My understanding of why we are sitting here with a ad hoc committee on redistricting, okay, is because there were members of this board that did not want to push through and approve the long-range facilities plan with Holland Hill and Mill Hill sitting in there as 504s, okay? And the caveat and the concession that I made to get that approved, because there were other projects in there that needed to go forth before the town bodies for bonding, like the windows at Ludlow High School that are still 5 years behind schedule, okay? Which I was on the Town Facilities Planning Commission when we first looked at that prior to I was on this board, okay? So, my concern was getting that long-term facilities plan approved so that we could go to the town board and get the other projects approved. I made the concession and says, listen, if you want to look at redistricting, I'll go look at it, okay? And I've made that, and I've stepped into that, okay? And maybe I should have held my ground and said, no, I won't, okay? So that's why I think we are here, okay? So, I mean, other board members may have a different take on that, but that's fine. So, one, I don't think it's going to work, okay, to solve the school space problem that we're having at the elementary school level, unless you go top to bottom and you say, forget all boundaries, forget all feeder patterns, and let's go look at the whole thing. And that ain't going to fly either, okay? So, given the charge that we've been given, okay, and following the guidelines that every other redistricting committee has followed in this town, okay, I don't see a pathway to doing that. Other people may disagree with that, but that's, I hope I've cleared some of those issues up for you. I don't know if I have or not, so.
Other members of the board wish to make a comment. Mrs. Maxon Connelly.
I'd just like to follow up on Mr. Convertito. Does that clarify it?
Not really, because I feel like it again is coming back to they're looking at racial balancing for redistricting. I get that. I get that we need to look at redistricting, moving things around for racial balancing.
And that's a separate issue.
Separate. If they come back and like, we can't figure it out, we can't do anything, then why do we have another committee looking at redistricting just for fun? Like, what is fun about that? The whole town is ticked. So if you look at redistricting for racial balancing, I get that. That makes sense. We have issues there, but I also don't know how you're going to solve it. Now, just redistricting for what purpose? If we're going to build out Holland Hill and we're going to work on racial balancing, what's this other little redistricting committee over here doing? And why is it here?
So to answer that, dating back, this long-range facilities plan has been talked about since, I don't recall if it was on the agenda in September or October. That's where the conversation started.
And I'm sorry, and that's where he is saying it essentially came up because people were against the building.
Correct.
And so they said, okay, let's look at redistricting.
And again, all members are in favor of the core facility renovation of Holland Hill and Mill Hill. That's not up for debate. They need the work.
It's all the other facility plans.
No. What it is that what precipitated this ad hoc committee was the discussion over the long-range facilities plan, which we needed to vote on. The primary focus, there was nothing else. We had a few questions about a few other items on that long-range, 10-year long-range facility plan. But the entire focus started with which one do we do first as a major renovation, Holland Hill or Mill Hill?
Right.
So that's also a separate issue. This board resolved that Holland Hill will be first. In being first, there is no debate that the core facility, the cafeteria, the APR, those other spaces, dedicated spaces, need to happen. That's not up for debate.
Okay.
The debate that started when we were doing this, and the issue we kept asking Mr. Cullen the board directed him to bring back revised numbers if we opted to not renovate it to make 24 general ed classrooms, if we renovated it instead to have fewer classrooms, the notion being that extra bodies could be moved to where there were spaces. And when that conversation kept coming up again and again by enough members, it was only then that Mr. Dwyer commissioned the ad hoc committee, not ever having made a statement advocating for redistricting as the solution, but if enough board members are going to say we need to look at this to address space issues, then we need to form a committee, and 3 people, conveniently for the other 6 of us, volunteered to do so. So that's the timeline. Long-range facility plan, everything on it looks good. These 2 schools, which one's first? We decided Holland Hill was first. No debate that the core renovation was needed. The debate is how many general ed classrooms. If you don't build 24, it was with the notion that extra bodies can be moved to another school, and thus what exactly that, I mean, Mr. Convertito has referenced potential ripple effects. We can't say for sure what that committee could potentially come out with in terms of what guiding principles we ultimately vote to support. Say, for example, we decided we don't, and I don't think anyone on this board is saying this. Say, for example, we said we don't believe in neighborhood schools. We believe that the fiduciary responsibility trumps neighborhood schools. Then that's saying, for the sake of saving money, we're shipping kids wherever. Again, no one is saying that.
Right.
But that's why the importance of these guiding principles to give direction to that redistricting committee, which was formed based on the story I just told you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes, yeah. Okay.
I'm not saying that you're in
It
support.
makes sense, but I think in the long term, if you look at the migration ratio and the projected population, we're going to move all these kids. Well, all these houses are for sale. Older people are moving out. People are moving in with kids. So if we have the money now, why don't we build the facility, not move kids around, and give ourselves space? Because people coming in looking at these houses are going to go to Westport and other places. They're not going to buy a house that's slated for Riverfield to 2 years later be moved to Osborne Hill, to 2 years later be Mill Hill. That's not how you want your child's education to progress. You want continuity. So you have to look at the continued projection of who's coming in and coming out. We can't fix it for the next 2 years.
Are there other board members? Ms. Carnell, Mr. Patton, Mr. Fattabine.
I think you touched on a topic that has come through. You said, if we have the money, why aren't we doing it? That's the point. We don't have the money to do all the projects.
The Board of Finance has given the majority has given the go-ahead to go ahead and do this.
It only
Not to do all the projects.
Just to interrupt for one moment. Every legislative body, excuse me, if members of the public, Mr. Kerry, if members of the public could allow the board to engage with the
I did.
speaker. One of the truisms in government is that it doesn't happen until it's voted. So there may be conversation, but there is no vote by the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, or RTM yet that has moved the
It just
project
seems
forward.
as if the consensus through town discussion is the majority is saying, let's do this. So that's why I feel paying a consulting company, sitting in these meetings, having ad hoc committees formed, when everyone's saying, let's just do this, like, we're wasting everyone's time. Like, let's just do it.
So, Ms. Carnell, you wanted to make a comment.
I'll let Mr. Kerry make my comment for me, because
please.
apparently
Ms. Carnell.
he had a need to do that.
Ms. Carnell, please feel free to make a comment.
I'll pass.
You'll pass.
If she'd like to defer to me, Mr. Dwyer, I'd be that.
Mr. Kerry, you've had your turn at the mic. Thank you. Mr. Patton, I think, is next. Mr. Fattabine, did I see you raise a hand?
Let me
Mr. Lorette?
try and simplify some things. It sounds like you're getting it, but you're still frustrated. Hopefully,
I will be frustrated until I hear
and trust me, we agree. I think I reluctantly said that if such a ad hoc committee was formed, I think I had my head in my hands and said I would agree to serve on it to make sure things were done appropriately, which was not to say that I was in favor or not in favor of redistricting. I was not, and still stand by that. So take the racial imbalance thing out of the equation for a second. So the ad hoc committee as Ms. Maxinelli said and Mr. Convertito said, was formed because when the plan for the long-range plan for facilities for the town, for the schools, when it came to us, yes, it was which school was going to go ahead of the other, and then the conversation came up. It was in the plan to be to have not just core upgrades. It was in the plan to be expanded, like Stratfield School, like Riverfield has, because we needed more space and we want to get rid of the portables. So, again, the conversation came up. Maybe we don't need to make it as big as we have in the plan because the numbers have been changing. So that's where the beginnings of this came about, to say, well, we'll do the basic renovations and as much upgrades as we can. And Mr. Cullen, from the central office, gave us some revised numbers to say, well, you could probably make it this size and you'd save X amount of dollars. And so that's the genesis of where the redistricting committee came in, because there's no other way to kind of see if we can make the smaller numbers work than to see, if you can create a plan to essentially move some pieces on the board. The racial imbalance thing and those consultants came about because that was an entirely separate situation. We were getting these consultants, and it was like, hey, wait, they're going to look at the redistricting thing as a potential solution for that thing over here. We can piggyback on that. But if the racial imbalance part of this didn't exist, and the conversations still happened as they did, this committee would have had to do what the board did years ago, and they would have had to come up with plans and do research on our own, without consultants who are experts in those fields and whatnot. So I hope that explains things a little better and at least gives you a little better insight.
Sometimes the more you talk, the more confusing it gets. But Mr. Fattabine, not
directly to me.
No, not to Mr. Patton, but the different board members use different words, and then that just adds to confusion. I think Mr. Patton, Mr. Llewellyn, and you wish to speak, Mrs.
I just had a
Lamacona?
comment to his comment. I don't know
Mr.
if
Patton,
it's okay.
Mr. Fattabine, do you mind if she?
Always deferring.
This is actually brief. I just wanted to clarify
Please
that
do.
So when the group was first put together, it actually had the commission of going to hire a consultant. That was what the group had initially been put together to do, to go hire a consultant. But then it was decided that the board members can't hire a consultant directly, that the superintendent has to hire the consultant. And at that point, I guess Mr. Patton and I weren't even at that meeting, the commission statement changed to what it is now. So it evolved, and actually, the superintendent had already hired a consultant for a different purpose. And that's where these two things started intermingling. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, everyone keeps saying it doesn't make sense. Like, I'm not completely, like, out of, it all makes sense. I'm just, by sitting here for the past 3 hours, it has been, you guys have, as the board, have been using racial balancing and redistricting and Holland Hill interchangeably the whole night. So yes, I understand that we're clearing that up now, but I still feel like everything makes sense, but I still feel like we're not speaking about them independently.
Mr. Fattabine, if I could, we're getting to the
All right.
10-minute mark, so I want to,
Yeah.
actually, we're past it, so I want to get to the last speaker as well, Mr. Fattabine.
All right, well, the gist of your question, as I understood the last of it, was why redistrict now? Why go into that now? And I'll give you my thoughts on that. Having been involved in several redistrictings, no redistricting, in my experience, is smooth. Everyone hates redistricting. I hate redistricting. And some of the original concepts that we came up with in past was this headroom capacity, where we don't utilize the whole capacity of the school, and that was good. Other concepts were, which I advocated for, some flex space. Have flex space, such as that you can close a portion of the school and still have the school maintained, go on when capacity, when enrollment drops. The problem is that in this instance, in our case, enrollment has dropped. And if you wait too long to address that enrollment drop, and you get below a certain level in an elementary school where enrollment is unsupported because it costs more to run an elementary school when it's utilized. You're going to have budgetary issues and funding issues. And if you wait too long to address that problem, the answer is going to be close the school. And I don't like that answer, We've had closed schools in the past. The ideal situation is to have a combination of headroom, flex space, and neighborhood schools where you don't have to close. And if you plan appropriately with head space, flex space, and the appropriate number of schools, you won't have to close a school. But if you ignore it and say, we don't want to address it now and don't touch it, you can do that for a year or 2 or 3 years, but someone else is going to have to address it. And at some point, you'll be faced with a situation that is more painful the longer it waits.
And just to respond to that, I feel like if you do it one construction project to get to 460, I don't know the exact numbers, 462, 482, instead of going to a 504, doing one large construction project is less expensive in the long term than doing one construction project and another one 5 years later at the exact same school. To break them up into 2 construction projects, for the if you're going to 482 and then 5 years, you're like, oh, she got on 504, you have to bring back all the crews, and that expense just is more than it was the first time to do it right.
Okay, Mr. Llewellyn, you have the last word, and then we'll go to the last speaker.
Thank you. To add some clarity here, you know, one of the things I'm hearing sitting here from my own board members is that this was all done in order to get the waterfall approved. Okay, I'm saying one of the board members.
Mrs. Maxon-Connelly, if I could have Mr. Llewellyn please move.
If that's the case, it's interesting. I think that a number of people here wanted to at least look at it, because we do have declining enrollment, albeit slightly. We've closed schools in the past, and people are saying every school needs to be a 504. So we've got projections that were done in 2014 by MGT that were updated that would indicate that maybe 504 is not the right number. So let's do our fiduciary duty and at least take a look at it. Now, it was turned into a bigger deal, I think, than it probably should have been, because I think it did. I think it whipped up the public, and it didn't necessarily need to. But, you know, to be crystal clear, if the purpose of this was to get the waterfall passed, they would have voted it through. You know, this is a collective board decision. It is not, you know, any one individual or any subgroup of individuals, because the subgroups haven't been able to get a whole lot through. I think, you know, it's our responsibility to look at it, but, you know, where we'll end up, we don't know. It does so happen that it coincided with the racial, so the work is going to need to be done anyway. But I think, you know, if we build everything out and then we end up having to close, that's a problem. But at least let's work with current facts. And the facts that we have that are most current say the growth is not there. Now, we're going to get another report, and those facts may say, oh, it's here, but it's not here, or the last one was completely wrong, you know, we've got to build everything out. We're going to find that, but at least we need to take the steps.
Excuse me, we're well past the 10 minutes. 2 board members wish
March.
to make a comment, so if I could ask you to just listen to the final 2 comments and then get the last speaker up here, I'd very much appreciate
it was the
it.
final
Mrs.
comment.
Gerber.
Okay, well, just in the interest of facts, I think it is important to look at the long-range facility plan and see that for Dwight, it is not slated to be expanded to a 504 school. Neither is Jennings. Neither is Sherman. Neither is North Stratfield. So the only 2 projects in the long-range plan that have general classroom space being added to them are Mill Hill and Holland Hill. All of the other schools, Dwight, Jennings, North Stratfield, have core facility upgrades that they need. They do not have any regular classroom additions, so they will not be built to 504. They will stay at the enrollment numbers they were at, 357 for Jennings, 378 for Dwight, 483 for North Stratfield. So the only 2 schools that aren't at 504 that are slated to become 504 schools based on the long-range facilities plan are Holland Hill and Mill Hill.
Thank you.
I
Mr.
stand
Convertito.
corrected. It's been the verbalization that we should have 504s, but not in the plan. You are correct.
Thank you. Mr. Convertito, last word.
Hasn't been verbalized at this table. It was verbalized at the Board of Finance table. And the thinking that let's see how things go is exactly what got us here in the first place, okay? Back to Mr. Carey's point. Look at your 20-year history. I only have to take you back 8. K through 5 was 4,950 students. Take 11 schools times 504 and take 90% of that, and guess what you get? 4,979. Pretty good planning for a committee that did it 10 years ago.
Thank you. Thank you for coming forward. And the last person that wishes to speak, do you still wish to come forward? Please do.
Hi there. My name is Lisa Havey. That's Havey with an H. And I live at 216 Longview Avenue, Fairfield, Connecticut. And I'd like to actually speak to the criteria that was presented. And I would like to talk to the points of neighborhood school. And I'd like to talk about Holland Hill being a Title I school. But before I do that, I would like to ask that anybody coming back here in November, please consider putting forth a motion to disband this ad hoc committee. It is premature, and, well, I'll just leave it at that. If there was ever a definition of a Sisyphean act, this board sure has taken it under, and, well, you're not ready. But Title I at Holland Hill and Title I at McKinley, Title I funds come from the federal government, and they get dispersed to the district. And I know somebody will correct me if I'm mistaken. They get dispersed to the district, and then the district disperses them to the schools based on a percentage of students that are eligible or that receive free and reduced lunch. If you redistrict students out of Holland Hill, you skew that number to the point that the money doesn't follow the student. So you could conceivably get a student or two or 5 or 20 or 100 that will no longer receive breakfast as a benefit under the federal funding. You also put that student, you put that student in a school that's not Title I funded, and they don't have extra programs, they don't have extra staff. Each school can decide how to spend their Title I funding. And it supports not just the students that are eligible for free and reduced lunch, but it supports the students as a whole community. And you can't find extra money. I mean, I've sat here in the audience since about 2001 when my oldest son started Holland Hill. Thank you. And there's less and less money every year. So try to keep those neighborhood schools where they're receiving funding to support the students. I'd also like to add in my final 30 seconds, thank you, that it's not this board's job to fund or to figure out how this gets funded. Your job is to figure out the best possible solution to deliver the best possible curriculum to the students. It's the other bodies of this town who have the distinction and the obligation to figure out how that gets funded. So I like the priorities, I like the 1 through 5, but I'd like the neighborhood schools to be included with the Title I caveat. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Gerber, I think you're up first if you wish to.
Well, I agree with what Mrs. Havey says in terms of the importance of neighborhood schools, which I've spoken to numerous times, and my belief that we don't have the spaces in other parts of our town without completely taking apart everything that we have. It's a very slippery slope, and you go to one school and another. Even moving Osborne Hill to Riverfield, that changes the middle school feeder. Yes, Osborne Hill and Holland Hill would work because they go to the same middle school and high school, but Osborne Hill doesn't have the space. They're still waiting on their core facility upgrade. So while they have the annex, which helped in the short term, they still have inappropriate spaces where students are receiving services. So I don't think it's such a great idea to have Holland Hill students go from that building where they're getting services in inappropriate spaces to go to go to Osborne Hill and have the same issue. So for that reason, for the complexities of the middle school and high school feeders, I don't see how it is possible, and I don't believe that we have the seats that make it a worthwhile enterprise to continue down this road.
Other board members that wish to make a comment? other board members that wish to make a comment? Anything that you want to say is in response or not? You don't
I would
need
just
to,
like to, if I could, take a moment to thank Mr. Convertito for his time on this board and for taking on this committee. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
Mr. Fadabine, thank you very much for your time over the years. I've sat out here for a long time, and I appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you. Let me, no, please, thank about 70 people that started the meeting and about 30 or so, maybe 40, who stayed with us the whole time. I actually enjoy these town hall style meetings. It's an idea that originally came out of the communications committee that Jessica Gerber chaired, and it took a while to get them into motion, but I think they're helpful for dialogue back and forth between the board and the public. I said I would hold my comments till the end. Several of them were made by others, so I'm not going to repeat that. When you're chair of the board and two members continually raise the question of redistricting, and then two other members say we have a responsibility to look at it for fiscal reasons, and then Mr. Convertito raises his hand and say, I'll serve on the committee, and Mr. Patton then raises his hand. I have 6 board members who say I'm willing to look at it. When I was on the Rye Board of Education, we faced this question. We said, no, we're not going to do pocket redistricting. 4 years ago when I ran, people asked me that question. I said, no, I'm not in favor of pocket redistricting. I'm still not. Any inference that because I established the committee that must mean that I'm in favor of redistricting is a wrong inference. I created the committee because that's my role as chair when a number of board members say we should look at it. Second, I do believe that the concept of looking at a 504 design, I believe that Mr. Kerry is right. Whatever decisions we make have 20, 30-year lifespans to them, and that we ought to be looking not at what is going to happen in the next 4 years when we serve on the board, but what's going to happen 20 years from now when somebody else is on the board and somebody else's children are there. So building capacity is important for me. Unfortunately, no board can make a decision that binds a future board. And so it is each future board, whoever is sitting here, that finally votes to move Holland Hill forward. It is a future board that finally decides what are the planning principles that are going to be used. And so the fact that the board that a couple of other board members sat on created this plan does not bind future boards, future legislative bodies. That's just part of what happens in government. I am concerned about the idea that you get some people who vote to build schools, and they're there for the grand opening for a photo op, and then they don't vote for the funding needed to operate those schools. Mr. Fadabine, I think, is not correct on some things, but he is correct in this area. We need to convince not only the majority of this board, but a majority of the Board of Selectmen, a majority of the Board of Finance, and a majority of the RTM that this is needed for our children's benefit. And if this discussion has led to making that more possible, then as frustrating as these last 3 or 4 months might have been, if it gets us to the end goal and we get the money we want out of the RTM, I'm going to declare victory and start putting a shovel in the ground. So, having said that, we are now at the 10-minute mark, and I will say that this portion of the agenda is over, but I'll ask Mr. Llewellyn if he would open up with some comments to say farewell to Mr. Fadabine.
Thank you very much. Regardless of how the election turns out, this board will have a gap that's not filled with Mr. Fadabine's departure. I've only worked with him for the last 2 years, but have had but he has been the board's resource for things other than just the transportation. He's provided us with insights into the history of many issues and brought a traditional approach to government, to governance, with the insight and oversight. He's proven to be unflappable, reliable, trustworthy, and ethical. He's been able to keep the needs of our students in focus and bring perspective. He's willing to admit when he doesn't know something. He's been a strong advocate of adhering to the bylaws, Robert's rules, and the law. I think for once the board may share my views and allow me to speak on its behalf when I say that we will truly miss Paul at the table in November. He's been an invaluable asset to Fairfield's Board of Education for his service and his integrity. So I want to thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Perhaps Mrs. Maxon Kennelly could make comments about Mr. Convertito. Then, because Mr. Fatabeen is the senior person, I'll ask him to make any final comments that he wishes to make to us, and then Mr. Convertito. Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
Going back to Mr. Dwyer's comment at about 7:35 tonight about this, they're speaking at their last board meeting. I certainly hope this is not the last we see of you, that as prior board members often come back and help to give a little history lesson to current board members, I'm sure you'll find it an irresistible allure to coming back to future board meetings. One thing that every Board of Ed member gets, we've often been approached these past few years by a certain history teacher at Fairfield Ward High School, and Mr. Flynn asks board members if they would come and, as part of a civics lesson, speak about service. Well, as we look to rewrite or to approve, discuss the social studies curriculum, in terms of a civic lesson, there could be a little subheading of John Convertito. And by that I mean to say that he has been an advocate for his children, an advocate for his schools, an advocate for this district with at the micro level, at the macro level, is just an understatement. I think we got a small taste of it here tonight. As a local attorney, father of children in the school district, he stepped up in a way that we can only hope we find somebody in the future to do as well. And here is my list. Board of Ed rep for years for Sherman Elementary School, working on tools for schools, which I know is one that was, first of all, a little hint to the future of what Mr. Convertito would be signing on for. The Sherman School Annex effort, which has been truly enduring. And speaking of enduring, there is the fabled, legendary involvement with the Sherman Holiday Fair, which I think he will be doing for decades, if you were to talk to anybody in the Sherman community. Has worked on the Town Facilities Committee, the Special Project Standing Building Committee, led a town-wide referendum, fighting in advocacy for children, fighting to have money restored to the education budget, running for the Board of Ed and serving these 4 years, not just being on the sidelines, but getting right into the midst. Signing on, even in his waning days, for this redistricting committee and providing providing invaluable leadership to it. And even tomorrow, going to speak to the Sherman PTA regarding the progress of redistricting. As I said, I just consider him a walking civics lesson, and one that I can only hope we might find 3 or 4 other bodies to replace the work of that one. And with all of this in his history, I definitely see a building committee in his future, but that's just up to whoever grabs him first. And I was very, very lucky in my first year in being elected the same year as Mr. Convertito to have a seat next to him. And the wealth of information that would get whispered to the side to me was just so valuable in my first year. And I thank you, Mr. Convertito, for all of your words of wisdom, for all of the work that you have done. Quite irreplaceable, as I said. I hope we find several bodies that can. And thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'll ask Mr. Fatabeen if he wishes to make some final comments, but I'll only say one thing. I fully agree with Mr. Llewellyn's comments. Paul and I, maybe in the last 4 years, have had 2 specific issues but minor issues that we might have disagreed on, and some people might have thought, boy, they don't get along. We do, actually. Paul and I have met several times and have good conversations, so I also miss him. I'm going by this. 10:54, Mr. Fatabeen.
All right. Well, I guess I would like to say, coming to the board was always a desire of mine. from a long time ago. And I had waited to come to the board till after my children, except for one had a 6-month overlap, being out of the public school system. I wanted to do that to be a little bit more objective. But in any event, I myself am a product of the public school system here in Fairfield. My kids are a product of the public school system in Fairfield. I've always believed that Fairfield Public Schools were very good, and they are very good. And I have positive proof of that because when my kids went to college, many of the teachers, or when they interviewed, or professors would indicate how they didn't think they had those courses in high school and how well prepared they were in going on to their college careers. So I've always believed in education and had a desire to help improve education. I won't deny that the last couple of years have been difficult on the board. Having been involved in the Board of Education for 6 years of total, they've always been contentious. They've always been split. I was also involved in other boards prior to being on the board myself. I was on the I was on the Education Committee for the RTM for many years, which would interface with the administration. I've been involved with 3 different superintendents, other committees at the time when there were different assistant superintendents. And it has changed. Education has changed. You have a lot more influence from the federal government than you had in the past. You have more mandates coming from the state. And to some degree, the boards have lost some degree of control over how they manage and control the district. But I've always tried to be sort of a moderate, and I've always tried to be realistic and practical in the way I approach things. You can always have a wish list and want everything you can get. But the realities are, and having fought the battles in the past, you may not get everything you want, and you may not have the funding you want. And we've been lucky. The town has been supportive of education in most instances, but that doesn't mean there haven't been budget battles. There have been. My hope is that those budget battles don't get more difficult. But as the economy gets more complicated, and the economy may not grow as people desire, you may start having more budget battles. That's my fear. And then you have to make difficult decisions. But anyway, I will continue to the extent I can to support education. I always have. And I will certainly, I don't know if I'll miss my time. I think it's time for me to go. I've been, doing this for a long time. Hopefully I was productive, and it's time for me to move on.
Thank you. Mr. Convertito.
Mr. Chair, motion to extend the meeting to 11:10.
I'm going by my clock, and I think he's going to be doing it within 3 minutes.
You
correct?
get 10 minutes? 11:15?
I shall be brief. One, I'd just like to thank Ms. Maxim Kennelly for her words. Some 26 years ago, when I was engaged to my now wife, we sat down and talked about children and education and so forth, and both my wife and I were products of public education, except that my wife went to a local high school here in southern Connecticut, public high school. So when we talked about kids and education, I said, well, our kids will go to private school, right? And she was like, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, we're both products of private school and private colleges. And she's like, no, our kids are going to public school. I'm like, what are you talking about? How could that be? You're a doctor, I'm a lawyer. Why would we do that? And she looked at me and said, I wouldn't be the doctor today had I not gone to public high school. So we put that on hold because we were getting married in about 3 months, and it was not something I was going to debate or have a fight over at that point in time. And 5 years later, we had our son. And 5 years after that, I was walking up, actually 4 years after that, I said, well, we're going to enroll him in private school. And she's like, no, we had this discussion 9 years ago. There is no more discussion. And the following year, I was walking up to Sherman School. And when I walked up to Sherman School, I saw 5 old beat-up portables. That was 16 years ago. And I made it my mission from that point in time to make sure there was every portable in this school, in this district, was gone. Okay? 16 years later, it still hasn't happened. Okay? So, I have enjoyed my time on this board. I would just like to thank a couple of people who got me involved in this system. Jeff Steele, Pam Iacono, who's sitting in the audience now, Kevin Kiley, Jim Walsh, And to those people who may be out there running for the board and have not yet sat on it, I will leave you with two pieces of advice I got when I ran. And one was from Jim Lee, who was a longstanding member of this board, who said to me, sit down and shut up for the first 2 months and listen. And the other was from Tom Flynn. And he said to me, your job is to put forth the best educational program that you can. My job is to tell you if you can't afford it, and the RTM will tell you if they want to afford it. So I have enjoyed my time. I thank you. I'm taking my sign, and I motion to adjourn, Mr. Chair.
So, one more round of applause. Mr. Convertito was looking at the same clock that I was. It's exactly 11 o'clock. A motion to adjourn is on the table. All in favor, please raise your hand. Mr. Fattabine, one last motion. Yep, thank you. We're adjourned. Thank you very much.